You've been taught to fear pain, to see it as the enemy, something to run from, hide from, or numb until it fades. But here's the truth. Pain is not the problem. It's what your mind does after the pain that creates suffering. Because pain is part of life, a cut, a loss, a heartbreak, a goodbye. Suffering is the story you tell yourself about it. The loop of, why me? This shouldn't have happened. I can't take this. And that's where Buddhism comes in, not as a religion, but as a mirror. It shows you that freedom doesn't come from avoiding pain, but from understanding it, accepting it, and seeing that it was never truly against you. The Buddha taught that life will always bring pain, but whether you suffer or not, that's a choice. A quiet one, made deep inside your awareness. Tonight, as you listen, you'll begin to see pain differently. The fear will soften, the noise in your head will fade. You'll start to notice the space between what happens and how you react, and in that space, you'll find peace. This isn't just another lesson about mindfulness. This is a doorway, a path to acceptance, clarity, and real freedom. Are you ready to walk through it? Let's begin. Before we begin, take a breath. Feel the quiet between each inhale and exhale. That small space, the pause between one breath and the next, is where truth lives. You've heard the saying, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. It sounds simple, almost too simple, but buried beneath those words lies the map to emotional freedom. This is where we start, not by escaping pain, but by understanding why it hurts so much more than it needs to. Pain itself is just a signal, a message from the body that something has changed. A cut, a burn, a loss. It comes, it speaks, and it passes. But suffering, that long echo that follows, that's the mind's doing. It's what happens when thought wraps itself around the experience and refuses to let go. The body says, this hurts, but the mind says, this will never stop. This means I'm broken. This shouldn't have happened. And in that moment, pain transforms. It stops being a message and becomes an identity. Science has shown that the body's pain is processed in the brain's somatosensory cortex, the part that simply registers sensation. But suffering, the emotional layer, lights up an entirely different region. The prefrontal cortex and limbic system, the areas responsible for meaning, memory, and emotion. That means pain isn't just about what you feel, it's about what you think you feel. The mind becomes a magnifying glass, turning a small cut into an open wound, a brief rejection into a story of lifelong inadequacy. This is what Buddhism calls the second arrow. The first arrow is the pain, the unavoidable, the real, the raw. The second arrow is the one we shoot ourselves with, the mental story, the resistance, the judgment. The Buddha said, when touched by a painful feeling, the uninstructed person sorrows, grieves, and laments. He feels two pains, physical and mental. The wise person feels only the first. That's the physics of suffering. The multiplication of pain through identification. The reason this happens is because the brain evolved to protect you. It remembers pain as a survival mechanism. When you touch a flame, your body flinches, and your mind records it. Fire equals danger. But the mind doesn't know when to stop protecting. It starts predicting pain, reliving pain, fearing pain. It keeps the wound alive long after the injury has healed. You begin to think, I was hurt before, so I will be hurt again. And so, pain becomes your default setting. The body heals, but the mind stays inflamed. Buddhist philosophy teaches that the root of suffering lies in tanha, craving or attachment. We crave pleasure and resist pain. But resistance doesn't erase pain, it feeds it. Think of the last time you couldn't sleep because of an ache or worry. The more you tried to ignore it, the louder it became. That's the paradox. What you fight, you strengthen. Neuroscientists have found the same pattern when we focus on avoiding pain. The brain's alarm circuits, the amygdala, amplify their signal, increasing distress. Acceptance, on the other hand, quiets the alarm. To understand the mind's role in amplifying pain, look at how memory and meaning intertwine. When something painful happens, the mind doesn't just record the event, it links it to everything similar in your past. A breakup becomes proof that no one stays. A failure becomes confirmation that I'm not enough. Pain becomes a thread that ties together every past disappointment. This is karmic conditioning in action, not punishment, but repetition. The energy of unexamined pain loops back into the present, shaping how you see yourself and the world. Karma, in this sense, isn't fate written by the gods. It's the momentum of thought and emotion. Each time you resist or cling to pain, you create an imprint, a habit in the nervous system. Neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity, neurons that fire together, wire together. Buddhism calls it samskara, mental formations that shape perception. Over time, these imprints solidify into patterns, anxiety, fear, bitterness, and you begin to suffer not from pain itself, but from the weight of old reactions. What makes the mind such a powerful amplifier is its obsession with why. The moment something hurts, we start asking, why me? But the truth is, not all pain has a moral. Sometimes, it's just what is. The mind's need to find meaning in every discomfort often traps us in analysis and regret. This endless questioning is like adding friction to a wheel. The more it turns, the hotter it burns. Buddhism teaches that liberation begins when you stop demanding explanations from reality. There's also the illusion of permanence. Pain feels like it will last forever because the mind freezes time around it. A heartbreak at 20 can still ache at 40, not because the event continues, but because the story does. The body forgets, but the mind archives. It plays the same scene, again and again, each time reinforcing the emotional imprint. But impermanence, anicca, is the natural law of existence. Everything that arises must pass, including pain. The more deeply you understand this, not as an idea but as a lived experience, the lighter life becomes. Here's the irony. When you allow pain to exist without resistance, it often dissolves faster. The nervous system calms, the muscles release, the breath deepens. Mindful awareness doesn't remove pain, it removes the extra suffering layered on top. Studies in mindfulness meditation show that when practitioners focus on the raw sensation of pain, its texture, its pulse, its rhythm, activity in the brain's emotional centers decreases. Pain remains, but it loses its grip. It stops being you. Buddhism doesn't ask you to like pain, it asks you to meet it honestly, to observe the sensations without collapsing into the story. When you stub your toe, the body reacts instantly. Sharp pain, breath catches, then release. The moment you say, "I'm so clumsy," or "Why does this always happen to me?" suffering begins. Awareness, pure and simple, stops that chain reaction. It's not suppression, it's clarity. The awareness itself doesn't suffer, it simply witnesses. Now, think of emotional pain, betrayal, grief, rejection. The mind often mistakes these for personal failures. It attaches identity to them. I am unloved, I am broken, I am not worthy. But what you're actually feeling is energy moving through the body, tightness in the chest, heaviness in the stomach, dryness in the throat. When you return to the body, you step out of the narrative. You see that emotions are just sensations with stories attached. Without the story, they come and go like waves. The Buddha compared this to fire. Pain is the spark, but suffering is the fuel. The more you feed it with thoughts, the longer it burns. The less you feed it, the quicker it fades into smoke. This is the physics of suffering, a reaction between attention and emotion. Where attention goes, energy flows. If your attention clings to pain, it multiplies. If it rests in awareness, pain transforms into wisdom. Modern psychology agrees. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches that thoughts shape feelings, and feelings shape actions. The cycle continues until awareness intervenes. When you begin to notice your thoughts, "This will never end. I can't take this," as thoughts rather than truths, their power weakens. You start to see that suffering isn't what pain does to you, it's what you do with pain. This understanding doesn't mean detachment in the cold sense. It's not about becoming numb. True detachment, what Buddhists call upekkha. Equanimity is warmth without clinging, care without control. It's the ability to feel deeply without being drowned. When you hold your pain in this way, it starts to reveal its purpose. Every ache, every loss, every disappointment becomes a teacher, not a punishment, but a portal. The karmic layer of suffering also deserves attention. Karma is often misunderstood as cosmic justice, good or bad fortune handed down from past lives. But in the context of the mind, karma is simply the echo of reaction. Each time you meet pain with resistance, you reinforce the habit of resistance. Each time you meet it with awareness, you reinforce the habit of freedom. The energy you send out through thought, word, or action always returns in some form. This isn't mysticism, it's energetic physics. Every cause has an effect, and every reaction plants a seed for the future. When you begin to see this clearly, you start to take responsibility not for what happens, but for how you meet it. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this showing me?" The focus shifts from control to understanding. You learn to watch how pain arises in the body, how the shoulders tense, how the breath shortens, and in that observation, you create space. That space is liberation. The Dalai Lama once said that pain will always visit us, but we need not give it a room to stay. This wisdom comes from direct understanding of how the mind works. Suffering only persists when we feed it with attention, memory, and resistance. When you stop identifying with the experience, when you see it as weather passing through the sky of awareness, it can't take root. The sky doesn't suffer the storm. It allows it to move through. The fascinating thing about both neuroscience and Buddhist psychology is that they converge on this truth. Awareness changes the brain. Studies at Harvard and Oxford have shown that long-term meditators have thicker gray matter in regions related to emotional regulation and pain tolerance. Their brains literally reshape themselves through acceptance. That's the physical manifestation of enlightenment, not mystical light, but rewired neural pathways that no longer overreact to pain. To apply this in daily life, you don't need to sit in silence for hours. You just need to start noticing. When discomfort arises, physical, emotional, or mental, pause. Feel the raw sensation before labeling it. Ask yourself, what does this actually feel like? Instead of, "I hate this," notice pressure in the chest, warmth in the face, tightness in the throat. By staying with the sensory data, you prevent the mind from spiraling into interpretation. You cut the second arrow before it flies. In Buddhism, this practice is called vipassana, insight meditation. It trains you to observe experience directly, without judgment. Over time, you realize that everything joy, pain, fear, love arises and dissolves on its own. You don't have to chase or fight anything. The world becomes lighter, not because it changed, but because your relationship with it did. There's another layer to the physics of suffering expectation. The mind constantly measures reality against its idea of how things should be. I should be happy. This shouldn't hurt. Life should be fair. These shoulds are invisible weights that make pain unbearable. When you drop them, you discover something profound. Life was never meant to be painless, it was meant to be real. And reality, when accepted, is peaceful even in its imperfection. Consider how children experience pain. They cry when they fall, then moments later, they're laughing again. Why? Because they don't yet have the mental machinery to turn pain into identity. They feel it fully, then release it. Adults, on the other hand, carry mental storage, units of every hurt. We reopen the same wounds with thought. Healing, therefore, isn't about forgetting. It's about letting experience complete its natural cycle without interference. There's beauty in this understanding. Once you see that suffering is not punishment but misunderstanding, compassion naturally arises for yourself and others. You start to realize that everyone suffers from the same illusion, mistaking thoughts for truth, feelings for facts, pain for permanence, and in that recognition, judgment softens. You stop taking things so personally, you stop blaming, you start freeing yourself, not by fixing the world, but by freeing your perception of it. The mind will still resist. It will say, "But if I don't fight the pain, I'll be weak." Buddhism answers that strength isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of peace amid pain. Acceptance doesn't mean you approve of what happened. It means you stop arguing with reality. And once that inner conflict ends, energy returns. The same energy that was trapped in struggle becomes available for healing. You begin to see that pain itself is neutral like rain. It can nourish or flood, depending on how you meet it. If you tense against it, it drowns you. If you open to it, it cleanses you. This is the transformation of suffering into wisdom. It's not a miracle, it's physics, emotional cause and effect. Over time, awareness becomes second nature. When pain appears, instead of spiraling into, "Why me?" your mind whispers, "Here is pain." Simple, direct, free of drama. The body feels, the mind observes, the moment passes. You don't cling, you don't resist, you don't narrate. And in that silence, the ancient illusion of suffering dissolves. What remains is clarity, the quiet understanding that everything you've ever feared was just energy asking to be seen. That's how the mind amplifies pain, by misunderstanding its message. Pain says, "Something has changed." The mind hears, "Something is wrong." But change is not wrong. It's life moving. The moment you align with that truth, you stop fighting the current. You float. You see that what hurts you can also wake you. That pain, stripped of story, is not your enemy but your teacher pointing you back, again and again, to the stillness that has never been wounded. And so, as this lesson settles, remember, suffering isn't proof of weakness. It's proof of awareness, the place where consciousness meets its own shadow and begins to understand itself. When you stop resisting the experience, you don't lose yourself. You rediscover who you truly are, vast, spacious, unbroken. The storm passes, the sky remains. That is the first truth of acceptance. Pain is inevitable, but suffering ends the moment you see that it was never yours to carry. When pain is no longer the enemy, something remarkable happens. The heart, once armored, begins to open. You start noticing that others hurt too, not in theory, but in the quiet tremors of their eyes, their silences, their masks of composure. What once felt like your private prison starts to look like a shared human landscape, and from that recognition grows compassion, not pity, not sympathy, but a profound sense of connection that softens everything it touches. This is where the paradox begins. The more deeply you feel the pain of others, the freer you become from your own. Most people think compassion is heavy. They fear it will drown them in others' suffering, that it means carrying everyone's pain on their back. But in truth, real compassion is weightless. It doesn't burden, it liberates. Because true compassion, karuna in Buddhism, isn't about taking on pain, it's about dissolving the boundaries that make pain seem separate. When you open your heart to another's suffering, something extraordinary happens. The wall between you and them starts to dissolve. You begin to realize that suffering is not personal, it's universal. And in that moment, the grip of my pain loosens. The Buddha described compassion as the natural response of an awakened heart, spontaneous, effortless, and vast. It isn't forced, nor does it arise from moral obligation. It flows naturally when you stop defending yourself from life. When the illusion of separateness fades, the suffering of another is felt not as a burden but as part of the same river you already swim in. The more you resist that current, the more isolated you feel. The more you open to it, the more you merge with life itself. That merging, that dissolution of self, is what frees you. In neuroscience, compassion activates the same neural pathways associated with pleasure and bonding, particularly the release of oxytocin, the so-called love hormone. When you genuinely connect with another's pain, your body responds with warmth and safety, not despair. It's as if the brain recognizes compassion as homeostasis, balance restored through connection. The Dalai Lama once said that compassion is not just good for the world, it is the highest form of self-care. Because when the heart opens, the mind stops contracting around its own wounds. We often confuse compassion with empathy, but they are different frequencies of the same energy. Empathy feels the pain of others. Compassion transforms it. Empathy without awareness can lead to burnout because it mirrors another's suffering without context. Compassion, on the other hand, sees the whole picture. It includes both the pain and the wisdom beneath it. When a monk feels compassion for a starving child, he doesn't drown in sorrow. He sees the child's suffering clearly, feels it deeply, yet his heart remains steady, filled with a wish to relieve that suffering without being consumed by it. This stability arises from understanding impermanence, that even pain, no matter how vast, is temporary and transformative. In daily life, compassion is often mistaken for weakness. People worry that being too kind means being taken advantage of, that softness equals vulnerability. But the truth is, compassion is the purest form of strength. It takes courage to feel fully, to keep your heart open when the world gives you every reason to close it. Anger and indifference are easy defenses. They create distance. Compassion erases that distance. It allows you to meet the world as it is, without the armor. And in doing so, it disarms the ego, which thrives on separation. To understand the liberating power of compassion, it helps to look at the structure of the self. The I thrives on contrast, me versus you, right versus wrong, my suffering versus yours. Compassion dissolves these boundaries. When you feel another's pain as your own, the identity that separates you weakens. Suddenly, the mind has less material to build its walls with. This collapse of boundaries is not loss, it's expansion. You don't disappear. You become larger, wide enough to hold joy and pain together without resistance. Psychologists call this self-transcendent experience. Moments when the sense of self expands beyond the personal to include others. These states have been linked to higher well-being, resilience, and even improved immune function. Buddhism understood this long before science did. The heart that beats for all beings beats in rhythm with the universe. The one who gives compassion receives peace because the act itself dissolves the illusion of separation, the root of suffering. One of the greatest misunderstandings about compassion is that it means feeling sad for others. That's sympathy, and it keeps you separate. Real compassion sees suffering clearly, but adds love to the perception. It doesn't say, poor you. It says, we are the same, It doesn't pity, it participates. It steps into the shared human field and radiates care without expectation. That's why the Buddha described compassion as a form of wisdom. It recognizes the emptiness of the separate self. When you sit beside someone who is grieving and you offer presence instead of solutions, you are practicing karuna. You are silently acknowledging the truth that their pain is also your pain because it exists in the same field of human experience. You don't need to fix it, you just need to be there. And this act of being pure, steady, and kind becomes a mirror that heals you both. The paradox becomes clear. When you stop protecting yourself from the suffering of others, your own suffering loses its edge. It's as though every time you open your heart outward, the inward wounds start to breathe again. They're no longer hidden behind shame or self-pity. They are seen in the light of shared humanity. Compassion doesn't erase pain. It reframes it as something sacred, an invitation to awaken. To cultivate compassion, Buddhism offers the practice of metta bhavana, loving kindness meditation. It begins simply wishing well for yourself, then for a loved one, then for someone neutral, and eventually for someone you dislike. At first, this can feel forced. The mind resists, saying, "They don't deserve my kindness." But that resistance is precisely the doorway. Each time you extend goodwill to someone difficult, you're training the heart to open beyond preference. The walls weaken, and freedom grows. In this process, you also learn that compassion for others begins with compassion for yourself. Without self-kindness, compassion becomes duty. With it, compassion becomes joy. Buddhism teaches that self-compassion is not indulgence, it's balance. When you care for your own wounds gently, you gain the strength to care for others without depletion. This is how monks spend years serving in hospitals, prisons, and disaster zones without losing their peace. They understand that compassion replenishes itself through giving. From a karmic perspective, compassion purifies. Every act of genuine care dissolves layers of egoic residue, old patterns of fear, anger, and judgment. When you choose understanding over blame, you stop creating negative karmic seeds. The energy that once recycled suffering now generates clarity. It's not mystical, it's energetic cause and effect. Anger multiplies division. Compassion multiplies connection. Over time, this shift transforms your mental landscape. Where once there were sharp edges, there is fluidity. Where once there was reactivity, there is patience. What makes compassion so transformative is that it operates beyond logic. The rational mind says, "If I take on others' pain, I'll have more pain." But the compassionate heart knows that empathy shared is pain divided. The more you include others in your circle of care, the less isolated your suffering becomes. The weight is dispersed across the web of connection. It's like light passing through water. It bends, it softens, it refracts beauty through the very act of meeting resistance. In the brain, this is reflected in the shift from the amygdala, fear center, to the prefrontal cortex, higher reasoning, and insula, empathy and awareness. Compassion activates circuits that regulate emotions and foster calm. So, while hatred and anger trigger stress responses, compassion produces physiological relaxation. This is why forgiveness feels like release, because it literally is. The nervous system relaxes, the breath deepens, and the heart rhythm stabilizes. Forgiveness, at its core, is an act of compassion toward oneself, disguised as mercy toward another. One of the deepest insights of Buddhism is that compassion is inseparable from wisdom. Without wisdom, compassion burns out. Without compassion, wisdom becomes cold. Wisdom sees the truth that suffering is caused by ignorance. not evil. Compassion responds with warmth, not punishment. Together they form the perfect balance, the clear mind and the open heart. When you understand that others act out of confusion, not malice, judgment dissolves. You stop taking their behavior personally. Instead of, "they hurt me," you begin to think, "they are suffering too." That shift ends the chain reaction of pain. Compassion also dismantles pride. Pride feeds on the illusion of superiority, that your suffering is deeper, your struggles harder, your path more righteous. But compassion equalizes. It reminds you that everyone walks through storms unseen. The person who seems cruel might be living in silent despair. The one who appears indifferent might be protecting an old wound. When you see this, resentment loses its power. You begin to wish others peace, not because they earned it, but because you understand that peace is the only thing that truly heals. Even in relationships, compassion transforms everything. When you replace blame with understanding, you shift from defense to connection. Instead of, "How could they do this?" to "me," you ask, "What pain made them act this way?" This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it frees you from carrying its poison. Compassion doesn't mean you accept injustice. It means you respond with clarity instead of hatred. It allows you to set boundaries from wisdom, not bitterness. In this sense, compassion becomes the highest form of intelligence. It perceives beyond appearances and recognizes that every harsh word, every selfish act, every cruelty stems from confusion and pain. When you see that clearly, you stop adding to the collective suffering. You become a stabilizing force in a chaotic world, calm, steady, grounded. This is what the Buddha called the lion's roar, the unshakable confidence of a heart that meets everything with understanding. The paradox deepens further. Compassion doesn't just heal emotional pain, it also alters perception itself. When your heart is open, you stop dividing experience into pleasant and unpleasant. You begin to see beauty even in the brokenness. A tear becomes sacred, an argument becomes an opportunity to grow, a loss becomes a reminder of impermanence. Compassion reveals that everything, even suffering, can serve awakening. The more compassion you cultivate, the less self-conscious you become. The ego thrives on isolation, on the belief that it stands apart. Compassion dissolves that illusion by merging awareness with life. When you care for another being, even silently, your consciousness expands. You stop living in the small, confined story of me and step into the vast story of we. That expansion is freedom. Buddhist monks often describe compassion as a form of mental hygiene. Just as we wash the body daily, we cleanse the mind through acts of kindness. Without this practice, resentment and fear accumulate like dust. Every kind thought, every small act of service, is a gentle rinse that clears the lens of perception. When you live with compassion, your world feels lighter, not because problems vanish, but because the mind no longer carries them as personal burdens. Compassion also teaches acceptance of imperfection. You begin to see that people, including yourself, are works in progress. Instead of demanding perfection, you appreciate effort. You forgive mistakes quickly because you understand that everyone is learning how to love better. This understanding turns daily interactions into practice. Every encounter becomes a chance to express kindness. Perhaps the greatest gift of compassion is that it redefines strength. In a world that celebrates dominance and control, compassion stands as quiet rebellion. It doesn't conquer, it connects. It doesn't harden, it heals. True strength is not the power to resist pain, but the courage to feel it fully and still remain kind. When compassion becomes your instinctive response, fear loses its foundation. This kind of strength isn't loud. It shows up in patience with those who misunderstand you, in gentleness with yourself after failure, in the decision to love again even after heartbreak. Compassion turns these moments into sacred ground. Each time you choose understanding over anger, you transcend the old self that once needed to be right, to be superior, to be separate. Over time, compassion becomes your natural state, not something you do, but something you are. Pain may still arise, but it doesn't find a home. It passes through an open heart that knows the secret. Pain shared is pain dissolved. When you see others through this lens, your life shifts. You stop trying to win and start trying to heal. You stop seeking comfort and start creating it. The Buddha said, "If your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete." This is the heart of the paradox. You can only give what you allow yourself to receive. Compassion for yourself means recognizing your limits, resting when tired, forgiving when you fall short. When you stop attacking yourself for being human, your capacity to love others expands infinitely. Self-compassion is not selfish. It's the root of all compassion. The transformation doesn't happen overnight. It unfolds quietly, like dawn spreading across a dark horizon. One day, you realize that the things that used to anger you now stir empathy. The people who once hurt you now awaken understanding. You start to feel free not because the world changed, but because your perception did. You see that love and wisdom were never opposites. They were two sides of the same awakening. This is the essence of the compassion paradox. The more deeply you allow yourself to feel, the lighter life becomes. The heart that embraces all suffering becomes untouchable by it. When there is no division between you and others, there is no place for loneliness, bitterness, or blame to hide. Compassion becomes your natural rhythm, effortless, radiant, unbroken. And so, the path continues. From understanding pain to dissolving it through love, the journey deepens into freedom. The next step unfolds naturally, the exploration of how the self itself, the I that clings to experience, creates the illusion of suffering. Because once the heart opens, the question arises, who is it that suffers at all? When compassion softens the heart, a quieter question appears beneath the surface of relief. If pain eases when the heart opens, who was holding it so tightly in the first place? The answer points to a shape we rarely examine because we live inside it, the felt sense of I. The personal story that stands in the center of every scene and says, "This is happening to me, this defines me, this will follow me." Here begins the root of continuity, the mechanism by which a brief ache becomes a long life of suffering. The raw event is short. A word cuts, a body tenses, a goodbye lands. In the nervous system, signals rise and fall like weather. But the self steps in as editor and archivist. It names the event, files it, ties it to old memories, predicts a future based on the past, and stamps a title on the folder. What this says about me. That title is the glue. Without it, pain would visit and leave. With it, pain becomes identity. The mind does not only remember what happened, it remembers who it believes it became because it happened. This identity is not a single thing. It is a bundle of patterns that move together. Buddhism calls them the 5 aggregates: body, feelings, perceptions, impulses, and consciousness. None of them is the self, yet together they create a sense of self. Like a flame that looks stable, though the fuel is always changing, the I seems solid because the patterns refresh each moment. When a painful event triggers these patterns, the system locks into a familiar shape, a tight chest labeled fear, a thought labeled rejection, a memory labeled proof, and a vow labeled never again. The shape feels like who you are, but it is only configuration, not essence. Modern research mirrors this. brain networks involved in self-referential thinking, often called the default mode network, light up when we tell stories about ourselves. The more the network loops, the stronger the sense of me, the stronger the emotional tag, the longer the echo. This is why rumination exhausts the body even when nothing new is happening. The body sits in today while the mind replays yesterday as if it was still true. Suffering stretches across time, not because the event continues, but because ownership continues. Ownership hides in language. Notice how phrases turn sensation into identity. There is a difference between "there is pain" and "I am in pain." One reports a fact, the other becomes a character. There is a difference between "sadness is present" and "I am sad." The second invites the mind to defend a role, protect a wound, prove a theory. This is not wordplay. Language directs attention, and attention directs biology. When you place the pronoun over the sensation, muscles brace, breathing shallows, and the threat system stays online. When you shift the phrasing, physiology follows the truth of the moment, a passing state, not a permanent self. Attachment grows wherever the self finds fuel. Praise becomes proof of worth, blame becomes proof of flaw. Gain feels like expansion of me, loss feels like collapse of me. The swing between the two creates a life built on monitoring, measuring, and maintaining the story of who I am. This is exhausting. It is also fragile, because all the anchors of identity are unstable. Roles change, bodies age, relationships shift, status rises and falls. When identity clings to moving targets, every change hurts. The pain of change is small. The pain of the self that refuses change is vast. Grasping appears in subtle ways. The mind says this always happens to me, even though it did not always happen. The mind says, I will never get better, even though states have always changed. The mind says, this defines me, even though countless moments have carried different flavors. These sentences stitch a quilt of continuity that covers the living facts. The result is a self that feeds on repetition. If you listen closely, the self asks the world to behave in ways that confirm its familiar role, even if that role is painful, because the known feels safer than the unknown. This is how the I keeps yesterday alive. There is another layer that tightens continuity, the hidden contracts we make with ourselves. After hurt, a quiet promise forms. I will not trust. I will not risk. I will always anticipate rejection to prevent surprise. These contracts feel protective. In truth, they build a corridor where every door opens onto the same view. The corridor becomes a prison. The key is not outside. The key is the insight that the contract is optional, because the self that wrote it was only a momentary configuration trying to keep you safe. Safety is wiser now. Safety does not need that old rule. Buddhist insight cuts through this with a precise blade, not self. This does not mean you are nothing. It means the thing you call self is not a separate, permanent core. It is a process. When the process is seen, the grip loosens. Once seen, it is hard to pretend that thoughts are commanders rather than appearances, that feelings are orders rather than weather, that memories are destiny rather than artifacts. Not self is not a belief. It is an experience of how perception assembles a me each moment and how that assembly can relax. Practical work begins with gentle precision. Start where life actually happens, in the body. When a trigger arises, track the order of appearance. Sensation first. Label it with simple words: warmth, pressure, flutter, heat, pulse. Then note the emotion: fear, sadness, anger, shame. Then note the thought that follows: they do not care. I am alone. I always fail. Seeing the sequence breaks the fusion. The self is strongest when the sequence collapses into one mass. When you separate the strands, the weave loosens. A gap appears between what is felt and the story about what it means. In that gap, suffering cannot maintain its narrative momentum. Another method is decentering. Place the experience in awareness rather than placing awareness inside the experience. Instead of "I am the one hurting," rest in the sense that hurting is occurring within consciousness. Let sounds, sights, sensations, and thoughts come and go in the same open field. When all phenomena are treated equally, none owns the stage. The star named me loses its spotlight. You have not disappeared. You have returned to the wider room in which everything happens. Self-inquiry sharpens this further. When a painful identity appears, ask gently, "Where is the one who is suffering?" Look in the body. A chest sensation cannot be a person. Look in thoughts. Words cannot be a person. Look in emotion. A wave cannot be a shore. The point is not to deny experience, but to see that the owner cannot be found. What cannot be located cannot be pinned to pain. The result is not coldness, but relief, a soft release of extra weight that was carried by habit alone. Memory deserves special care. The brain reconsolidates memories each time they are recalled. This means recall is an opportunity, not a threat. When a painful memory arises, accompany it with presence, breath, and kindness. Let the body feel safe while the picture plays. The memory can then be stored with new context. It happened, and I am safe now. Over time, the emotional charge lowers. The self no longer uses that scene as proof of identity. The scene becomes part of a larger story that includes healing. Shame is the most adhesive identity. It whispers that you are the problem rather than that a problem occurred. To loosen shame, bring daylight to it. Speak it aloud to someone who can hold it without judgment, or write it with the clear intention of meeting it with care. Shame dissolves in accurate language and warm attention. It grows in secrecy, global labels, and harsh self-talk. When shame softens, the identity that fed on it starves. The sense of being wrong at the core loses its engine. Choice of goals can either free or bind identity. When goals reinforce the fragile self, every setback deepens suffering. Goals grounded in values rather than status help the mind relax its image. Serve, learn, create, heal. These aims do not collapse when praise withers or others misunderstand. They are stable because they point toward living qualities rather than external mirrors. When action flows from values, the self stops checking its reflection. Energy returns to what matters. Attention to time is crucial. The self builds continuity by dragging past and future into the now. The practice is to keep returning to present moment data. What is here right now? Which part of the body is speaking? What is the tone of breath? What thought requests rehearsal? Answer with direct awareness instead of narrative. The mind may try to bargain. If I worry enough, I will be safe. See the bargain as superstition. Safety grows from contact with reality, not from rehearsal of fear. Relationships reveal identity fast. In conflict, the self defends its image with blame, withdrawal, or attack. Pausing to name the protective move disarms it. I am defending. I am shrinking. I am trying to prove. Clarity replaces reflex. Then add honest speech. Speak feelings without identity labels. Say, when this happened, fear rose, meaning started, and I shut down. This invites repair without forcing either person into a role. The moment is handled, the identity is not fed. Grief asks for a special lens. Loss rearranges the world, and the self tries to keep the old map alive. The ache is pure. The suffering comes from insisting that life must feel like it did before. Let grief move through, and let identity change with it. The love that remains is not the same as the role that ended. When the self allows new forms, grief becomes devotion, rather than a permanent wound. The continuity becomes connection, not clinging. Body practices help because identity is not only mental. Gentle movement, grounded walking, and softening the jaw and belly signal safety to the nervous system. Safety quiets the impulse to build a defensive self. Restorative rest, regular nourishment, sunlight on the skin, and time in quiet spaces create a baseline where the self feels less threatened and therefore less aggressive in claiming territory. The simple disciplines are not trivial. They are the floor that carries deeper insight. Ethics support identity release. When conduct aligns with values, the mind stops rehearsing guilt and justification. Fewer inner trials mean fewer chances for the self to act as judge and defendant. Honesty, kindness, and restraint are not moral ornaments. They are engineering choices that simplify the inner system. A simple system suffers less because it generates fewer tangled stories. Subtle pride can hide inside spirituality. The mind can use practice to build a better self-image, the one who is advanced, awakened, or above others. That identity will suffer as soon as life refuses to honor it. The antidote is humility and humor. Catch the impulse to be special. Bow to ordinary life. Wash the cup. Apologize quickly. Thank often. Let learning stay lifelong. In a humble heart, pain has fewer hooks. Forgiveness loosens identity because the self often defines itself against an enemy. Without an enemy, the role of the wounded hero or righteous victim has no stage. Forgiveness does not deny harm. It releases the ongoing role that harm tries to assign. Speak this within. The past is complete. The lesson is kept. The role is dropped. Then live forward with clear boundaries and a light grip. You are not the character that old scenes asked you to play. Work with the senses as portals. Sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell arise fresh each moment, independent of the autobiographical loop. Rest attention in a simple sound or the feeling of the feet. The more contact with raw data, the less fuel for the storyteller. This is not escape. It is recalibration. The world as it is invites a self as it is not heavy, not armored, not rehearsed. Compassion for the self must remain woven through. Each time you catch the identity clinging, respond with warmth, not attack. The voice that says you did it again is the old manager trying to control through shame. Thank it for trying to help, then return to breath and presence. A kind witness dissolves the need for a loud defender. Over weeks and months, the system learns trust. Trust shortens the life of suffering because it short-circuits panic. Art and honest creativity can melt fixed identity. When you write, draw, sing, or craft without chasing approval, you enter flow where the watcher softens and the maker leads. Here the self is transparent, functions well, and does not obsess about itself. Such practice trains the nervous system to enjoy being without needing to be someone. After flow, returning to ordinary tasks feels lighter. The muscle of non-urgency strengthens. Silence is medicine, not just the absence of sound, but the choice to stop feeding the internal narrator. Sit for a few minutes daily with the simple resolve to let thoughts pass without commentary. At first, the narrator grows louder. With patience, it tires. Under the talk is a quiet aliveness that does not need labels. Touching this often shows the mind a contrast. Life is vivid, without the constant claim of me. There is a tender truth about healing identities built from trauma. The self that formed under threat did save you. Thank it. Then teach it new ways. Trauma-informed practice pairs mindfulness with titration, moving toward intense material in small doses. Choose anchors of safety, like breath in the belly or touch on the forearm, before visiting hard memories. Return to the anchor often. This way, the self learns that it can loosen control without being overwhelmed. Safety and freedom grow together. Notice the small, ordinary moments when identity is soft. Laughing with a friend, stirring a pot, folding clothes, walking under a wide sky. In these moments, you are not worried about who you are. You are simply here. Let these be teachers. The mind often overlooks them because they are not dramatic, yet they reveal the natural state, present, open, and unburdened by narrative. Remembering them during hard hours restores balance. Rituals can help retrain continuity. Mark transitions with simple actions that tell the body a chapter has closed. Wash the hands after a heavy conversation. Step outside and look at something living after finishing difficult work. Light a candle at night and place thoughts into it with a silent thank you, then extinguish the flame as a sign that the day's identities can rest. The nervous system appreciates clear signals. Clarity reduces the tendency to keep carrying old roles into new hours. Service loosens identity precisely because it shifts the center of gravity away from self-focus. When you help quietly, without broadcasting, the nervous system learns the relief of being part of a larger movement. The reward is not praise but belonging. Belonging is lighter than performance. A life that regularly touches service does not need as many personal stories to feel valuable. Gratitude is subtle medicine against the fixation of lack. The self clings hardest when it feels incomplete. Naming specific blessings daily does not deny hardship. It reveals the larger field in which hardship sits. Write them plainly. Morning light on the floor. A message from someone who cares. Clean water. Breath that comes on its own. The more the heart notices, the less the identity needs to claw for proof of worth. Across all of this, the deepest shift is trust in impermanence. When you trust change, you do not need a rigid self to defend against it. You can meet each moment with skills instead of stories. The stability you long to build with identity appears in a different form. Stability as responsiveness, strength as flexibility, confidence as intimacy with what is. This is maturity of practice. Soon, the continuity of suffering begins to break along natural seams. A trigger arises, and the system registers sensation, breathes, and returns. A harsh memory appears, and the heart holds it without turning it into fate. A label starts to stick, and humor peels it off. The self is still present as a useful function, a name, a role, a signature, but it no longer claims ownership of the sky. It becomes a helpful tool, not a heavy throne. From here, acceptance becomes simpler. There is less to protect because there is less fiction to defend. Pain may still knock, but it meets an open door and a spacious room. It does its work and leaves. The house remains bright. The old identity would have followed pain down the road and called the journey destiny. The new understanding stays home. This shift is not distant. It grows in the small choices of today. Speak plainly. Breathe when the chest tightens. Notice when language turns sensation into a self. Soften contracts that no longer serve. Thank the parts that tried to keep you safe, then let them rest. Keep the body cared for, the mind honest, the heart kind. Over time, the old continuity loses both story and stamina. What remains is a self that knows its proper size. Useful? Yes. Ultimate? No. Light enough to learn, soft enough to love, clear enough to release what has ended, strong enough to stand in truth without armor. In this clarity, suffering cannot find endless corridors. It finds a clean room with open windows, a simple chair, and a presence that does not argue. The chapter closes when it is ready, and life moves on without dragging the past behind it. From compassion to identity and beyond, the path keeps widening. The next doorway appears in the quietest place of all, the tiny instant before the mind labels an experience. There, in the brief pause before resistance begins, freedom waits like a held breath ready to be released. When the sense of self begins to soften, something extraordinary comes into view. Beneath the constant movement of thoughts and emotions lies a stillness so subtle that most people never notice it. It is not silence, yet it contains every sound. It is not absence, yet it holds everything that arises. Within this stillness lives a moment so brief, it almost goes unnoticed, the microsecond before the mind labels an experience. That is the birthplace of resistance. That is where freedom begins. Pain, pleasure, fear, joy, all pass through this same point. Before the mind decides whether something is good or bad, pleasant or painful, there is a raw flash of awareness that simply registers what is. The body feels, but the story has not yet formed. It's the most honest instant of consciousness. A direct meeting with life before the commentary begins. Once the label appears, I don't like this, this shouldn't happen, I need more of that, the experience splits. Awareness turns into struggle. That split is suffering's first breath. Most people live on the far side of that moment, reacting, defending, judging, craving. They live after the label. But awakening is about moving closer to the gap, training the mind to notice the point before reaction sets in. It may last only a heartbeat, but within that heartbeat lies infinite space. It's not mystical, it's mechanics. The nervous system receives a stimulus, the body feels it, and then the cortex assigns meaning. Between those stages exists a pause, a space without bias. When you start to sense that space, even faintly, you begin to understand what liberation truly means. This isn't about stopping thought, it's about seeing thought arrive. Pain arises in the knee before the mind says, "This is terrible." There is just sensation, warmth, pressure, vibration. Fear arises before the story says, "I'm in danger." There is only energy moving through the chest. The mind's labeling mechanism evolved to protect us, but now it misfires constantly, turning ordinary sensations into emotional battles. Training in awareness teaches you to stay with the raw data long enough for the labeling reflex to slow down. Buddhist masters call this mindfulness in its purest form, sati, the remembrance of present awareness. Neuroscience calls it meta-awareness, the ability to witness the contents of consciousness without identification. When this faculty strengthens, the brain's automatic circuits lose some of their grip. The amygdala fires, but the prefrontal cortex steps in to observe instead of react. Over time, this repatterning changes the brain itself. Mindfulness practice has been shown to shrink the amygdala and thicken regions related to regulation and empathy. What begins as a split-second pause eventually becomes a new baseline of calm responsiveness. Resistance is born out of habit. The mind's first label, bad, immediately calls forth its opposite, good. The self, addicted to comparison, starts measuring every sensation against preference. This comparison builds tension because reality rarely aligns with expectation. You stub your toe and instantly move from raw sensation to judgment. I'm so clumsy. The story arrives faster than breath. To see the moment before, it means to retrain the nervous system to notice sensation without evaluation. That is the art of liberation in motion. One way to train this sensitivity is through body-based meditation. Sit quietly, bring attention to the breath, and feel each inhalation as movement rather than meaning. When a discomfort arises, don't adjust right away. Let awareness meet the sensation before the mind intervenes. Describe it in neutral terms: warm, pulsing, tight, sharp. Stay curious. Curiosity is the antidote to resistance. Where judgment closes, curiosity opens. With repetition, the body learns a new rhythm. Feel first, label later, or not at all. The same applies in emotion. Suppose anger rises. Instead of saying, "I am angry," notice. Anger. Energy is here. Watch how heat spreads, how the jaw tightens, how thoughts cluster around blame. Each observation keeps you closer to that first microsecond. As the mind slows, you begin to see how labels form. You watch the word anger attach itself to a bodily storm. Then notice the secondary labels: wrong, unfair, again. If you don't feed them, they fade. Anger transforms into pure energy, moving and dissolving like wind through grass. The moment before resistance is not glamorous. It's small, quiet, and often uncomfortable. The ego finds no entertainment there because it cannot narrate. Yet this is the most creative space in consciousness. Every choice, every reaction, every emotional habit is born here. When you miss the moment, habit runs your life. When you catch it, choice appears. A soft smile can replace a sigh. A pause can replace an argument. Understanding can replace defense. Liberation is not about control. It's about recognition. Children live close to this space. They feel pain, cry, and then move on because they haven't built enough memory to sustain resistance. Adults, layered with years of interpretation, rarely touch raw experience directly. But awareness can return to that innocence through practice. You start noticing that sensations don't demand stories. A sound doesn't require opinion. A thought doesn't require belief. The world remains vivid without being filtered through like and dislike. This capacity also brings emotional intelligence. When you meet others from the space before resistance, you stop reacting to their defenses as personal attacks. Someone shouts, and you hear the vibration of sound before the meaning. Someone withdraws, and you sense their fear before your own insecurity. You meet behavior as information, not insult. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you precise. You respond from clarity rather than conditioning. There's a physical counterpart to this awareness. When resistance arises, the body contracts. Shoulders lift, jaw locks, breath shortens. These are signs that the microsecond has been missed. The key is not to fight the contraction, but to notice it quickly. Awareness of tension interrupts the cycle. Take one conscious breath, feel the belly soften, and you are back in the space before story. Over time, the body itself becomes an ally, signaling the moment resistance begins. In spiritual terms, this microsecond is the meeting point of samsara and nirvana, the turning of the wheel. Samsara is not a place. It's the momentum of reaction. Nirvana is not elsewhere. It's the stillness that appears when reaction stops. Each time awareness catches that initial impulse and lets it pass without clinging, the wheel slows. That slowing is awakening unfolding in real time. The process can be trained through simple daily acts. When thirst arises, pause before reaching for the cup. Feel the body's call, the movement of hand, the touch of glass, the taste of water. Each step is a chance to witness experience before preference. Over weeks, these micro-pauses accumulate. You find that life feels spacious, even in busy hours. Nothing has changed outside. The shift is in perception from living after resistance to living before it. The mind may resist this practice because it thrives on control. It wants to solve pain by strategy, not by presence. It will say, if I stay in this moment, I'll lose time. But awareness outside of resistance is not slowness. It is efficiency without tension. Actions become cleaner because they're not clouded by judgment. Work flows, communication softens, and the nervous system operates with less waste. An often overlooked aspect is how this Awareness reshapes memory. Experiences encoded without resistance are stored as neutral events. Those encoded with judgment become emotionally charged and easily reactivated. When you train to stay before labeling, even challenging events leave lighter traces. This is why seasoned meditators describe life as vivid yet unsticky. Their memories are alive but not heavy. Compassion also deepens here. When you touch the space before resistance, you sense the same stillness in others. You realize everyone struggles with the same impulse to judge and cling. This understanding births gentleness. Instead of condemning yourself for losing presence, you smile, knowing that awareness itself noticed the loss. Each recognition becomes an act of forgiveness, and forgiveness is simply awareness that stayed kind. Practices like slow-walking meditation reveal the subtlety of this moment. Each step begins with intention, followed by movement, followed by contact. Between each phase lies a pause, tiny breath of space. As you train to feel these transitions, perception refines. You start to notice that the pause is not empty. It's full of potential. It's the same pause that exists before speech, before thought, before emotion. It's the womb of creation and dissolution. To live in awareness of it is to live free even while moving. In daily conflict, this skill is priceless. When tension rises in conversation, catch the breath right before the retort. That breath is the doorway back to awareness. In that pause, you can choose silence, clarity, or humor instead of reaction. The other person might still be caught in resistance, but one conscious breath often diffuses the entire charge. The brain rewires each time you interrupt this cycle, reinforcing the pattern of pause before reaction. The moment before resistance also reveals the nature of freedom. Freedom is not getting what you want, it's not needing to fight what is. In that small space of pre-labeling, everything is allowed to exist. Pain, joy, confusion, peace all pass through the same gate. The difference lies in whether you tighten around them or stay open. To stay open doesn't mean to enjoy discomfort. It means to stop making war with reality. When war ends, peace is not something you achieve, it's what remains. Even the breath holds this teaching. Between inhale and exhale lies a natural pause. It is brief but essential. Life depends on it, yet it demands no effort. When awareness rests there, the mind tastes effortless balance. The body breathes itself. You simply witness. That is the same quality of freedom that exists before resistance. It's not something you build, it's something you stop interrupting. To strengthen recognition, use short reflections during the day. Before reacting, ask simple questions. What is actually here? Is this a sensation or a story about sensation? Is this emotion demanding action or just movement asking for space? These inquiries are not analysis. They are reminders to return to the pre-label moment. The more often you return, the more the nervous system learns to stay there naturally. Art and nature both invite this awareness. Looking at a sunrise or hearing a piece of music before thought names it beautiful is a pure encounter. The mind rushes to say, "I like this," but the experience itself was already complete before the comment. That completeness is always available, even in pain. The same awareness that meets beauty can meet discomfort. When you sense this equality, your relationship to pain changes forever. The subtle challenge is that awareness cannot be forced. Trying to grasp the microsecond turns it into another project of the ego. The approach is relaxation, not pursuit. You don't catch awareness, you stop running past it. The more you trust stillness, the clearer it becomes. Over time, resistance loses speed. Pain appears, awareness notices. The label arrives late or not at all. You start living closer to the source of experience, where everything is fresh. This training gradually transforms identity itself. When you live before resistance, the I that used to define and defend experiences has less work to do. You act without inner commentary. Decisions feel lighter. Relationships become smoother because there is less self to protect. The personality remains functional but transparent. You no longer mistake passing moods for truth. As perception refines, you see that awareness was never born in the first place. It was always here, quietly witnessing each wave. Resistance only clouds it for a moment. The moment before resistance is not a new state to achieve, but a return to what has always been constant. Pain, joy, thought, and silence all arise and dissolve within it. What remains is the same luminous field that existed before you named it me. When practice stabilizes, even the label awareness becomes unnecessary. Experience unfolds naturally, untouched by evaluation. Life lives itself through you, eating, walking, speaking, resting without friction. Suffering loses continuity because there is no resistance to sustain it. You still feel deeply, but nothing sticks. This is not detachment, it's intimacy with all things. In the end, the training is simple but endless. Stay close to the first instant, feel before you name, breathe before you judge, listen before you interpret. The pause before reaction is where wisdom lives. Every spiritual practice, from meditation to prayer to mindful movement, points back to this one doorway, the stillness before the mind claims ownership. As you live from that space, life becomes fluid, pain becomes instruction, joy becomes appreciation, and each breath becomes proof that liberation is not far away. It is here, in this exact moment, waiting in the gap between feeling and thought. And, as awareness learns to rest there, another dimension of endurance begins to unfold, not the endurance of suppression or struggle, but a noble endurance born of clarity, a strength that bends but never breaks, because it no longer resists what is real. When awareness begins to stabilize before resistance, life starts to feel lighter. You start to notice that freedom doesn't mean the absence of challenge, it means the ability to meet challenge without collapsing. The waves still rise, but something inside you stops fighting the tide. Here begins the next unfolding of wisdom, the art of endurance. Not the grim endurance of clenched teeth and forced smiles, but the noble endurance that holds pain with grace, steadiness, and dignity. This is the strength that neither hardens nor breaks. Endurance, in the Buddhist sense, is kshanti paramita, the perfection of patience. But the word patience here is often misunderstood. Most people think of patience as waiting without complaint, a passive acceptance of discomfort. In truth, noble endurance is active, awake, and wise. It's not suppression, because suppression hides pain, nor is it martyrdom, because martyrdom worships pain. It's the courage to stay fully present with whatever arises, without turning it into identity or drama. Endurance becomes transcendent when the heart meets pain without the extra layer of resistance. That means not denying what hurts, not romanticizing it, and not running from it. It's the quiet art of allowing. The Buddha called this anukampa, the ability to remain kind while staying still amid difficulty. When you practice noble endurance, you begin to understand that every experience, joy or suffering, has its own rhythm. Rushing or resenting only distorts that rhythm. Allowing restores balance. This kind of endurance is not natural at first. The mind, conditioned to fix or flee, doesn't know how to rest in uncertainty. But endurance grows from insight. You start to realize that discomfort itself is not the enemy. The real cause of agony is the refusal to experience discomfort. When you stop demanding that pain disappear, something shifts. Pain remains, but the panic dissolves. In that stillness, endurance appears naturally, not as effort, but as presence. The difference between suppression and endurance lies in awareness. Suppression is resistance disguised as control. It says, "I will hold it together," while secretly tightening the heart. Endurance says, "Let this be here," while staying open. The first adds tension, the second transforms it. You can test this in your own body. The next time frustration arises, notice the instinct to push it away. Then soften the breath and let the feeling spread. Feel the heat, the pulse, the ache. Paradoxically, as you allow it, it changes texture. It's no longer poison, it's energy in motion. True endurance does not numb you, it sensitizes you. When the heart learns to endure, it becomes vast enough to hold everything without breaking. This is why enlightened beings radiate peace even in pain, not because they don't feel it, but because they don't personalize it. They endure with awareness, and awareness dissolves the burden. In psychological terms, this is called distress tolerance, the capacity to stay conscious and functional during emotional turbulence. Modern therapy borrows this from ancient wisdom, but the Buddhist version goes further. It teaches that endurance is not just survival, it's purification. Each time you stay present with difficulty, the mind's compulsive habits lose energy. Endurance burns ignorance the way fire burns fuel. Kshanti also includes endurance in 3 dimensions: patience with the external world, patience with others, and patience with yourself. The first teaches you to accept conditions beyond control. Weather changes, traffic jams, illness, and aging, these are natural laws, not personal insults. When you stop fighting the inevitable, you conserve enormous energy. The second, patience with others, dissolves interpersonal suffering. People act from their conditioning, not to torment you. Seeing this clearly transforms irritation into compassion. The third, patience with yourself, is perhaps the hardest. Growth takes time. Endurance means letting yourself evolve without judgment. A person who practices noble endurance becomes like water. Water can be soft or powerful. It adapts to every container, flows around every obstacle, and wears down the hardest stone without aggression. It doesn't rush, yet it never stops. Endurance has this same quiet intelligence. It's not a refusal to act, it's the wisdom to wait for right action. When the mind is still, clarity emerges, and what once felt unbearable becomes manageable. It's important to understand that endurance is not passivity. The world often praises toughness, but toughness is brittle. Endurance is flexible. It allows movement without losing center. If a tree refuses to bend in the storm, it breaks. The one that yields survives. This yielding is not weakness. It's wisdom that knows when to step back, when to act, and when to simply witness. To cultivate noble endurance, awareness must stay embodied. Pain processed in the head becomes narrative. Pain felt through the body becomes transformation. When difficulty arises, anchor attention in the breath, the soles of the feet, or the rhythm of the heartbeat. Each anchor keeps you from drifting into the mind's stories. Endurance grows not by thinking about patience, but by practicing it moment by moment through breath and presence. There's also an emotional alchemy in endurance. When you allow pain to exist without resistance, it refines you. Anger transforms into clarity. Sadness deepens into compassion. Fear turns into wisdom. Each emotion, when fully felt without judgment, reveals a teaching. The process can be uncomfortable because the ego's shell cracks open. But what emerges is authenticity, the capacity to meet life directly, without pretense. In this sense, endurance is a form of love. Love expressed as stability. When you stay present with pain, you are telling yourself, "I will not abandon you." That message heals old wounds more deeply than any external comfort. Many of our struggles come from abandoning ourselves at the first sign of discomfort, numbing, escaping, blaming. Noble endurance reverses that pattern. It's the promise of companionship with your own humanity. There's a story from the Buddha's life that captures this essence. During a fierce storm, the monks were terrified and scattered, but the Buddha sat unmoved under a tree. When asked how he remained calm, he said, "The storm is outside. It need not enter." That is endurance, not ignorance of danger, but knowing that your awareness is bigger than the storm. Endurance also reveals the difference between pain and harm. Pain is part of life. Harm is pain multiplied by resistance or reaction. When you meet pain with understanding, it cannot harm you. It may move through you, but it leaves wisdom behind instead of scars. When you resist, you fight life, and the wounds deepen. This distinction frees you to face challenges without fear. Another essential quality of endurance is humility. To endure nobly, one must drop the need to appear strong. Pretending invulnerability blocks growth. Real endurance is honest. It admits, "This hurts, but I can stay." It doesn't need applause or recognition. It's a quiet strength that nobody sees, but that changes everything. Many people mistake self-denial for endurance. They think enduring means tolerating abuse or staying silent in the face of injustice. That's not noble endurance, that's submission. True endurance is rooted in wisdom. It knows the difference between what must be accepted and what must be transformed. Enduring harm without awareness perpetuates suffering. Enduring pain with awareness purifies it. The practice of Kshanti unfolds in stages. At first, endurance feels like effort, holding still when you want to run. With time, it becomes trust, recognizing that running would only delay peace. Eventually, it becomes ease, the understanding that everything resolves in its own rhythm when you stop pushing. This evolution mirrors the stages of meditation, concentration, insight, and equanimity. Each deepens the previous one until endurance becomes second nature. Endurance also requires perspective. When you see your challenges within a larger view, they lose the power to crush you. The ancient masters compared this to placing a spoonful of salt in a glass versus a lake. The salt makes the glass undrinkable, but the lake remains fresh. Awareness expands the lake of the mind. Difficulties dissolve in the vastness of understanding. Another way endurance becomes transcendent is through gratitude. Gratitude doesn't deny difficulty. It honors the lesson within it. Every time you endure with presence, you grow stronger, clearer, and more compassionate. Gratitude turns endurance from punishment into purpose. When you can say, "Thank you, pain, for showing me where I still cling," suffering becomes sacred instruction. Science again echoes this. Research on emotional resilience shows that acceptance and gratitude activate neural networks that counteract stress responses. The brain interprets gratitude as safety, which allows the parasympathetic system to restore balance. In other words, endurance without resentment heals both mind and body. Endurance also requires faith, not blind belief, but trust in the unfolding of reality. Faith is what carries you when clarity hasn't yet arrived. You may not understand why something is happening, but you can trust that it will lead somewhere meaningful if met with awareness. This faith is not naive optimism. It's the calm confidence that even darkness has a role in light. In community life, noble endurance builds harmony. A person who has trained in patience becomes a pillar of steadiness. Their calm presence diffuses tension. Their silence speaks louder than arguments. Such people don't absorb negativity, they transform it. In a world addicted to reaction, endurance is revolutionary. It breaks the chain of escalation and replaces it with peace. On a deeper spiritual level, endurance dissolves the illusion of control. The ego wants certainty and immediate resolution. Endurance teaches surrender, not defeat, but alignment with truth. You realize that you are not the driver of every outcome. You participate, you care, you act, but you release the obsession with result. This surrender is where endurance becomes transcendence. It stops being about surviving difficulty and starts being about living in harmony with impermanence. Sometimes, endurance looks like silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence that speaks of inner strength. In arguments, in grief, in loss, silence can hold more wisdom than words. Other times, endurance is active, showing up again and again for what matters, even when results are uncertain. Both forms arise from the same source, an unshakable trust in awareness. This trust grows through reflection. Look back at the hardest moments of your life. You survived each one. Some changed you in ways that hindsight now calls blessings. Endurance is proof of your capacity. Recognizing this history builds quiet confidence. You begin to understand that the mind's prediction of collapse is rarely true. Life sustains itself through you when you stay open. Noble endurance also transforms time. When you stop rushing through discomfort, time expands. Each moment becomes rich with detail, the rhythm of breath, the play of light, the pulse of the heart. You start living inside experience rather than waiting for it to pass. Paradoxically, this presence makes challenges shorter because they are fully met. What you face completely cannot linger. The highest form of endurance is love in action, compassion that stays. The Bodhisattva vows to remain in the world until all beings are free. That's the purest endurance, a willingness to meet endless suffering with endless patience. This doesn't mean tolerating injustice, but holding space for transformation. Love that endures sees beyond appearances. It knows that pain and ignorance are temporary clouds in the sky of consciousness. To cultivate this, practice forgiveness daily of others and of yourself. Forgiveness is endurance, extended through time. It says, "I will not keep carrying the weight of what has passed." Each act of forgiveness strengthens your inner flexibility. The heart that forgives easily cannot be broken because it bends with life. Endurance is also the ground of wisdom. Without it, insight collapses under stress. Endurance gives insight, a body something to live in when storms arrive. That's why the paramitas, or perfections, are built on patience. Generosity, discipline, and meditation all rely on endurance to mature. Without it, practice remains fragile. With it, practice becomes unshakable. As endurance deepens, joy returns. It might sound paradoxical, but real endurance carries lightness. When you no longer fight every discomfort, life stops feeling like battle. Small pleasures return: the texture of food, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of rain. Even in pain, gratitude hums quietly. You start to see that endurance is not heavy, resistance is. Endurance is fluid. This is the art of Kshanti Paramita, the transformation of pain into patience, patience into strength, and strength into peace. It's the discipline of remaining open when everything in you wants to close. It's the wisdom of waiting without despair, acting without aggression, and loving without condition. And, as this quality takes root, awareness matures into something even subtler, the ability to turn pain into insight itself. What once required endurance now becomes illumination. The same fire that once burned you now lights the way. This is the next unfolding on the path. The alchemy of emotion into wisdom, where endurance evolves into transformation. When endurance ripens, something quiet begins to change. The same pain that once demanded tolerance starts to reveal its hidden layers. Endurance gave you strength, but now that strength becomes a doorway not just to survive emotion, but to understand it. Here begins the deeper work, the transformation of pain into wisdom. What once felt like weight begins to shine with insight. This is emotional alchemy, the art of turning raw feeling into clarity, confusion into understanding, and suffering into compassion. Every emotion carries energy. Anger is heat, sadness is depth, fear is movement, joy is expansion. None of these energies are inherently negative. What turns them toxic is the story we attach to them and the resistance we add. Emotional alchemy is not suppression or indulgence. It's translation. It's learning to read the language of emotion instead of reacting to it. Each emotion arrives as a messenger, carrying information about our relationship with life. When you meet it with awareness, it transforms from burden to guide. Pain, in its raw form, is honest. It points to where something inside you is still attached, afraid, or unhealed. The first instinct is to avoid it, but avoidance only buries the lesson deeper. When awareness stays present, pain begins to unfold. You start to notice its texture, its rhythm, its message. It speaks not in words, but in sensations: tightening, warmth, trembling, hollowness. If you listen, it will tell you what it needs to release. If you judge it, it grows louder. Mindful observation turns this process into awakening. When you watch emotion arise and fade without interference, you see its impermanence directly. The surge that felt unbearable a moment ago begins to shift from heat to warmth, from pressure to openness. You realize that emotion is not a fixed object, it's a moving field of energy. This insight dissolves the illusion that you are the emotion. You are the awareness witnessing it. That simple realization turns pain into freedom. Buddhism calls this transformation panya, wisdom born from direct experience. It's not intellectual, it's cellular. The body itself learns that pain is safe to feel. The nervous system rewires. Each time you allow emotion to flow without resistance, you strengthen neural pathways of acceptance and weaken those of fear. Modern neuroscience supports this. Mindfulness activates the prefrontal cortex, which integrates emotional signals from the amygdala, creating balance between feeling and reason. What used to hijack your mind now becomes fuel for awareness. To practice emotional alchemy, presence must be anchored in the body. When emotion arises, the first step is to locate it physically. Where is it? Strongest chest, throat, stomach. Stay there. Describe it without judgment. Heavy, fluttering, burning, cold. Do not name it anger or sadness yet. Stay with the sensation. This step prevents the mind from taking over. Sensation belongs to the present. Story belongs to the past. Transformation happens only in presence. Next, breathe with the emotion. The breath is the alchemist's tool, the bridge between the conscious and unconscious. Breathe into the area where the energy lives, not to make it go away, but to give it space. Breath is awareness in motion. It teaches the body that pain can exist without danger. As you continue, the energy often begins to move or soften. Sometimes tears flow, sometimes warmth spreads. These are signs that resistance is dissolving. The heart of emotional alchemy is curiosity. When you approach pain with curiosity, you disarm it. You stop being its victim and become its student. Ask gentle questions. What is this emotion trying to show me? What belief does it reveal? What part of me feels unseen or unheard? Each question opens a door. Often, you'll discover that strong emotions arise not from the present situation, but from echoes of the past childhood wounds, unmet needs, moments of rejection. By observing them consciously, you release their grip on your present life. Awareness turns emotional pain into wisdom because it reveals its source. Anger, for instance, is often a shield for vulnerability. When you stay with anger long enough, you may feel the sadness beneath it, the sadness of being misunderstood or hurt. That sadness, when accepted, transforms into empathy. Fear, when met fully, reveals the longing for safety and trust. Once you recognize that, fear becomes awareness of fragility, a teacher of care. Every emotion, when seen to its core, contains the seed of its opposite virtue. That's the true alchemy. In the practice of insight meditation, this process unfolds naturally. The meditator watches thoughts, sensations, and feelings arise and pass like waves. Over time, the layers of reaction thin out. You stop chasing pleasant states and stop fleeing unpleasant ones. Pain loses its identity as mine. It becomes movement within consciousness, neutral, informative, alive. When you see emotion this way, it becomes your teacher rather than your tormentor. There's a Tibetan saying, "The obstacle is the path." Emotional alchemy embodies this truth. What you call obstacles, grief, betrayal, loss, are not detours from awakening. They are the very gateways. Each wound contains energy that, when met with awareness, turns into wisdom. Just as heat transforms raw ore into gold, presence transforms suffering into insight. You cannot skip this process because wisdom that bypasses pain remains theoretical. Wisdom that arises from pain is indestructible. The key difference between reaction and alchemy is willingness. Reaction contracts, willingness expands. When you're willing to feel without escape, the pain changes form. This willingness is not masochism, it's surrender to truth. It's saying, "This is what's here. Let me see it clearly." The ego fears this because its identity depends on avoidance. But once you stop running, you discover that emotion cannot actually harm awareness. It only reveals where the illusion of self was holding on. One powerful method for this transformation is labeling emotion with mindfulness, not to define it, but to recognize it. For example, when sadness arises, gently say to yourself, "Feeling of sadness." This simple acknowledgement separates awareness from the emotion without suppressing it. Research shows that labeling emotions reduces activity in the brain's emotional centers, allowing the rational mind to stay online. It's as if the mind says, "I see you," and the emotion relaxes. Recognition itself begins the alchemy. There is also the practice of Tonglen, or sending and receiving. When you feel emotional pain, breathe it in as if you are inhaling not just your suffering, but the shared suffering of all beings. Then exhale compassion and relief to everyone experiencing the same. This shifts the focus from my pain to the universal experience of pain. The emotion that once felt isolating now connects you to others. Compassion replaces contraction. What was once heavy becomes radiant. Alchemical transformation also requires honesty. You cannot change what you won't face. Many people disguise emotions behind spiritual ideals, calling anger passion, fear, intuition, or sadness depth. This only delays growth. Real transformation begins with radical honesty, naming what is truly there, even if it feels raw or unflattering. Awareness that includes imperfection without judgment creates the conditions for change. As awareness refines, you begin to see that every emotion is temporary. No matter how intense, it cannot stay. This insight alone softens fear. When you trust impermanence, you stop clinging to pleasure and resisting pain. You let emotions come and go like weather. This natural flow prevents stagnation. Emotional stagnation leads to suffering. Movement restores health. This is why allowing grief to move through tears is cleansing, while holding it back becomes depression. The body is an essential participant in this process. Each emotion has a corresponding posture, breath pattern, and muscle tension. When you consciously relax these physical expressions, you give the emotion room to evolve. For example, loosening the jaw and lengthening the exhale during anger reduces its heat. Placing a hand on the heart during sadness signals safety to the nervous system. The body becomes the laboratory of transformation, where awareness and sensation meet. Emotional alchemy also teaches you to recognize secondary emotions, the emotions about emotions. Shame about fear, guilt about anger, pride about sadness. These layers multiply suffering. Awareness can peel them away by noticing, here is fear, followed by, here is shame about fear. Each layer seen clearly loses strength. Eventually, you reach the raw core, the original emotion, and meet it with compassion. That meeting is liberation. Another vital insight is that emotion and thought feed each other. Thoughts intensify emotion. Emotion fuels thought. Breaking this loop is central to transformation. Mindfulness interrupts the feedback cycle by bringing attention to direct sensation rather than narrative. When you stop telling yourself why you feel something, the emotion's energy starts to disperse. Without the mind's commentary, emotion dissolves faster and leaves clarity behind. Emotional alchemy doesn't end with personal healing. As your understanding deepens, you begin to sense the emotions of others more clearly. But unlike empathy that overwhelms, this awareness remains balanced. You feel others' pain without drowning in it because you've learned to let emotion flow rather than stick. This is how healers and teachers sustain compassion without exhaustion. They don't absorb, they transmute. They meet suffering as energy that can be transformed through presence. Sometimes, transformation happens not through meditation but through creative expression. Writing, painting, music, or dance can act as vehicles for emotion to move and change form. When you translate pain into art, you are giving it new meaning, turning chaos into coherence. This is not escape, it's expression guided by awareness. The act of creation mirrors the inner alchemy. Raw emotion becomes beauty, and beauty becomes insight. One profound aspect of this transformation is humility. Pain humbles the ego. It reminds you that control is limited, that life moves through you, not just for you. When you bow to this truth, emotional turbulence becomes less personal and more natural. You begin to see that even strong emotions arise as part of life's intelligence, not punishments, but signals. Endurance taught you to stay, alchemy teaches you to learn. There is a stage in practice where old emotional patterns resurface intensely. This is not regression, it's purification. The mind, now strong enough to hold awareness, brings up repressed emotions for release. It can feel chaotic, but this is healing's rhythm, the sediment rising before the water clears. If you stay present and trust the process, the turbulence passes and leaves deep stillness behind. The same emotions that once ruled your life become portals to awakening. Emotional alchemy also involves integrating insight into action. When anger transforms into clarity, it might call for setting a boundary. When sadness becomes compassion, it might lead to service. Wisdom is not passive. It expresses itself through behavior. The mark of transformation is not the absence of emotion, but the presence of skillful response. You start to act from awareness instead of reaction. Over time, you develop what the Buddhists call equanimity, a steady mind that meets joy and pain with equal presence. This doesn't mean indifference, it means intimacy with both. Emotional balance arises naturally when you trust the process of transformation. You no longer chase highs or fear lows. You live in the middle way, where emotion flows freely without owning you. Even spiritual bliss can be transformed through this awareness. Joy, when grasped, turns into craving. When observed, it becomes gratitude. The same mechanism of transformation applies to every feeling. The moment awareness touches emotion, the duality of good and bad dissolves. All emotions become expressions of the same energy consciousness experiencing itself. This realization brings deep peace. You begin to see that what you called pain was simply energy asking to be known. The more you meet it, the less you fear it. Fear of feeling is the root of suffering. Feeling fully is liberation. Through emotional alchemy, even the heaviest grief becomes compassion, and the sharpest anger becomes courage. The final stage of transformation is silence, not the silence of avoidance, but of completion. When emotion has delivered its message, it dissolves into quiet awareness. That stillness is not empty. It is full of understanding. It's the same stillness you touched in the moment before resistance, now enriched by the wisdom gained through endurance. This silence is the true gold of emotional alchemy, not the absence of feeling, but the peace that arises when every feeling has been seen, felt, and released. And from this stillness, a subtler challenge emerges, the awareness of how even healing can become attachment. The mind that once suffered now seeks identity in being healed. This next turning asks a deeper question. What happens when even the desire to be free becomes another form of bondage? The answer lies ahead, in the understanding of the subtle ego within suffering, where even the pursuit of healing must finally be let go. When emotional alchemy matures, the heart becomes lighter and awareness begins to taste freedom. But here, at the very edge of awakening, a quieter illusion hides in plain sight. It is subtle, refined, almost noble. It wears the language of healing, the posture of spirituality, and the smile of serenity. Yet beneath it lies the same ancient root, the ego. The difference is that now, it no longer claims identity through pain. It claims identity through the desire to escape it. This is the subtle ego in suffering, the self that wants to be free so badly that it turns freedom itself into another possession. It begins softly. You start to notice progress in your path, calmer reactions, deeper insight, more peace than before. But the mind, conditioned to measure and achieve, turns these shifts into milestones. It begins to whisper, I am healing, I am awakening, I am evolving. The old I that once said I am broken now says I am spiritual. The costume changes, but the actor remains. This is the hidden trap of transformation, turning growth into another story of self. The ego survives, by comparison. When pain defined it, it compared suffering. When healing defines it, it compares peace. I am calmer than I was before. I am more aware than they are. I no longer get triggered. These sentences sound harmless, even encouraging, but each one secretly reinforces a sense of me at the center. And as long as the me is there, suffering has a seed to return to. Because the ego's nature is to grasp, it doesn't matter whether it grasps for wealth, status, or enlightenment. The structure is the same: identification with experience. The Buddha called this the subtlest form of craving, the craving for non-existence. It's the hidden desire to transcend suffering by annihilating the self that suffers. But wanting to get rid of suffering is still desire. And desire, however noble, strengthens the illusion of separation, the one who suffers versus the one who seeks to end suffering. In truth, there was never such division. Pain and awareness arise in the same field, like waves on one ocean. When the mind stops dividing them, both calm and turmoil lose their opposites. This doesn't mean you shouldn't wish to be free from suffering. It means freedom cannot be achieved through the will of the ego. The more you chase liberation as an object, the further it moves away. It's like trying to grab your reflection on the water. The harder you reach, the more it ripples. True release happens when the seeker dissolves along with the suffering. Then there's only awareness itself, silent, spacious, unowned. One of the most deceptive traps in healing is attachment to progress. You start monitoring your inner life like a performance. You judge whether you were mindful enough today, whether your meditation was deep enough, whether your reactions were spiritual enough. This constant evaluation turns presence into a scoreboard. You start chasing the perfect version of yourself, healed, wise, unshakable. But this perfection is fantasy. Awareness doesn't need you to be perfect, it needs you to be present. Progress happens naturally when you stop measuring it. Healing becomes attachment when it's used to prove worth. The ego loves subtle superiority, being the one who gets it, who's more conscious than others. Spiritual identity is still identity. The words may change, but the function is the same. To make the self feel safe through definition. Real growth feels lighter because it doesn't cling to definitions at all. You stop needing to be someone, even someone awakened. Another layer of this subtle ego is the fixation on control disguised as healing. You start believing that if you meditate enough, eat perfectly, or think positively, pain will never touch you again. This belief turns spiritual practice into armor. But life does not serve comfort, it serves evolution. Pain still comes, not to punish, but to keep you real. When you see this, you realize that true freedom is not control over experience, it's openness to all of it. At the root of the subtle ego lies fear, the fear of disappearing. The self, sensing its dissolving edges, clings even harder to identity through spirituality. It says, I am the witness, I am consciousness, I am awareness. But even these statements can become traps if clung to as concepts. The awareness you truly are doesn't need to name itself. The moment you claim awareness as mine, you've already created a distance. Pure awareness has no owner. It's not something you become, it's what remains when becoming ends. Mindfulness practice helps reveal this pattern. When you observe the mind closely, you see how it subtly claims every experience. It says, I did this, I achieved that, I failed here. Even in meditation, it comments, I was so peaceful, I lost focus, I need to go deeper. The noticing of these thoughts is key. Every time you see the ego reaching for ownership, awareness expands. The act of seeing without judgment begins to dissolve the grasp itself. You don't fight the ego, you illuminate it. Light naturally erases shadows. The ego also hides behind language of healing words like letting go, forgiveness, and alignment. These are beautiful when authentic, but when used as decoration, they become spiritual avoidance. You can say, I've let that go 1,000 times, and still carry resentment quietly in your chest. The difference lies in embodiment. Real healing doesn't need to be announced. It shows itself through gentleness, through the absence of inner tension, through your ability to meet life as it is. This subtle ego also expresses itself through the obsession with constant positivity. The idea that spirituality means always being calm, grateful, or joyful is another disguise for rejection of truth. Life includes darkness. Trying to avoid it in the name of high vibration is the ego's way of staying safe. Awareness that includes both light and shadow is true wholeness. You can only transform what you're willing to see. Pretending to be enlightened is the fastest way to stay asleep. True humility arises when you recognize how the ego infiltrates even your purest intentions. It's humbling to realize that the desire for peace can become a form of greed. Yet this humility is liberation itself. Once you see the pattern clearly, it loses its authority. The self that wants to awaken cannot survive its own scrutiny. When you look for it directly, the one who seeks, the one who heals, the one who resists, you find nothing solid. That absence is not loss, it's freedom. In practice, this means staying aware of how your spiritual path makes you feel about yourself. If it inflates pride or deepens guilt, the ego has hijacked it. True practice softens judgment. It brings kindness toward both the part that still clings and the part that longs to release. You start to treat the ego not as an enemy but as a child who misunderstood life. It's just trying to protect you. When you stop fighting it, it relaxes. When it relaxes, its grip on suffering weakens. The ego thrives on time. It says, "I was once broken, and someday I will be healed." Awareness lives only now. The moment you rest in now, there is no brokenness, no future self waiting for arrival. Healing is not a destination, it's the continuous unfolding of presence. The mind loves stories of evolution because stories guarantee continuation. Awareness doesn't need a story, it's already complete. One of the subtlest traps is attachment to the role of the wounded healer. You begin helping others not purely from compassion, but from the unconscious need to maintain identity through purpose. You want to be needed, to be recognized as wise or nurturing. The ego disguises this as service, but it's self-preservation. Real service has no agenda. It flows naturally because compassion is what remains when self-interest falls away. You don't serve to fix others. You serve because the boundary between self and other has dissolved. Awareness also exposes the ego's attachment to purity. The belief that awakening means transcending all human emotions is false. Enlightenment doesn't sterilize experience. It makes it more intimate. Anger, sadness, pleasure all still appear, but without the story of me. When the ego clings to purity, it judges itself harshly for any trace of shadow. This leads to repression and guilt disguised as discipline. True spirituality is messy, honest, alive. It's not about escaping humanity, it's about embodying it consciously. Even meditation can feed the subtle ego when used to escape discomfort. Sitting quietly becomes a way to control the mind rather than to know it. You start expecting every session to bring peace, and when it doesn't, frustration arises. The ego says, "I should be beyond this." But awareness replies, "Who is this I that should be beyond anything?" That question cuts through illusion instantly. Meditation, when practiced correctly, is not about achieving stillness, but about meeting what's already present, restlessness included. In deep introspection, you'll find that the ego's favorite fuel is judgment, even self-judgment for having ego. You start to think, "I shouldn't have these thoughts anymore," or "I'm failing at awareness." This meta-judgment creates endless loops of self-critique. The way out is radical acceptance. You simply notice, judgment is here, and let it be seen. When the light of observation touches it, the judgment collapses. Awareness does not judge, it simply knows. Another layer of the subtle ego is the attachment to being the observer. After awakening to awareness, some people begin to identify with the witness. "I am the one who observes everything," but this too becomes a role. The ultimate insight is that even the observer arises within awareness. There is no separate watcher, there is only watching. When you grasp this, even the last trace of "I am aware" dissolves into pure being. Awareness watches itself infinite, effortless, and silent. This realization shifts your relationship with healing entirely. You no longer see healing as something to accomplish, you see it as something that happens naturally when you stop interfering. Just as a cut heals when left clean and untouched, the psyche heals when awareness stops manipulating it. The ego heals by realizing it was never broken, only misidentified. What it thought it needed to fix was already whole underneath. Paradoxically, the more you accept that suffering may never fully disappear, the lighter life feels. When you stop demanding constant bliss, peace arrives quietly. The acceptance of imperfection is the ultimate perfection. You stop asking, "When will I be free from pain?" and begin to notice, freedom is here, even with pain. The ego cannot comprehend this because it sees liberation as an event. Awareness knows it as the nature of every moment. Practically, this means meeting each experience without agenda. When discomfort arises, don't use practice to remove it. Use it to know it. When joy arises, don't cling to it. Let it flow. Each moment becomes a mirror showing where the ego still hides. Gratitude replaces striving. You no longer meditate to escape life, you meditate to embrace it. Healing stops being a goal and becomes a side effect of honesty. In relationships, this understanding softens everything. You stop trying to fix others or make them see the light. You respect their process as part of the same unfolding consciousness. You realize that your peace doesn't depend on their awakening. This humility dissolves superiority and creates genuine connection. Love becomes less possessive, more open, a silent recognition of unity rather than a performance of care. The subtle ego also hides in spiritual disappointment, the feeling of failure when enlightenment doesn't arrive as expected. You may think, "I've practiced for years. Why do I still suffer?" But the question itself is the ego's voice. It measures progress as if awakening were a product. Awareness doesn't accumulate, it unveils. Each moment of sincerity is already awakening in action. The rest is the ego's impatience for results. Eventually, you start to laugh at the entire play, the seeker, the search, the frustration, the breakthroughs. You see that it was always awareness experiencing itself in different disguises. Laughter here is sacred. It's the release of cosmic irony. The ego's effort to dissolve itself is like a wave trying to stop being water. When you see this, striving ends naturally. What remains is simplicity, being as you are. At this point, practice becomes effortless. You no longer meditate to become peaceful. Meditation is what peace does when left alone. You no longer heal to achieve wholeness. Healing is what wholeness expresses as it remembers itself. The ego may still arise, but it's transparent, like a shadow dancing on sunlight. It's seen, but it no longer defines. Freedom, then, is not the death of the ego, but its integration. The self remains as a functional tool, a name, a story, a way to navigate the world, but not as truth. You can use it without believing in it. It becomes light, playful, useful. You no longer need to destroy it, you simply stop mistaking it for who you are. And from this effortless clarity, the next lesson unfolds naturally: how to extend this freedom outward without exhaustion. Because when the ego no longer clings, compassion flows without fear of depletion. The next step of wisdom explores how to sustain boundless compassion without burnout, the art of giving without losing yourself, of feeling everything without drowning in it. When the ego loosens its grip, the heart naturally begins to expand. Compassion arises not as effort, but as a quiet, effortless knowing that all beings move through the same tides of pain and joy. But even this radiant openness holds its challenge. The more deeply one feels, the easier it is to become drained by the world's suffering. The sensitive mind begins to absorb everything: the grief of others, the noise of injustice, the endless ache of empathy. This is where compassion, if misunderstood, becomes exhaustion. And yet, in the great Buddhist traditions, monks and teachers sustain compassion for all beings without depletion. How? Because they do not carry suffering, they understand it. Their compassion flows without ownership. Empathy fatigue arises when care is filtered through identification. The mind says, Their pain is my pain, and without awareness, this thought turns into fusion. You start to feel responsible for what you cannot control. The heart tightens, trying to hold too much. True compassion, however, is not fusion, it is connection without confusion. It allows you to feel with others, not as them. This distinction is vital. When awareness sees suffering clearly, it responds with love, but it does not drown. In Buddhist psychology, this difference is explained through two qualities: empathy, karuna, upanisaya, and compassion, karuna. Empathy senses another's pain. Compassion meets that pain with wisdom. Empathy alone is like water soaking into cloth it absorbs until saturated. Compassion, guided by wisdom, is like a flowing river it moves through without stagnating. Monks learn this flow through years of meditative training, cultivating equanimity alongside empathy so that care does not turn into burden. Equanimity, upekkha, is not cold detachment. It is spacious love. It sees the truth of interconnection without clinging to outcomes. When a monk sits beside a dying person, he does not resist the inevitability of death. He honors it with presence. Because he accepts impermanence, his compassion remains clear. There is sorrow, but no despair. Suffering is seen as part of the natural cycle of birth and decay, not a mistake, but an expression of life's unfolding. This insight protects the heart from burnout. The first step in moving beyond empathy fatigue is to understand that you cannot heal another by suffering with them. Pain does not cancel pain. Awareness does. When you enter another's grief with clarity, your calmness becomes medicine. People do not heal because you hurt with them. They heal because your peace reminds them of their own. This is what monks embody: a stable field of presence where others can rest. Compassion must be rooted in balance between feeling and wisdom. Too much feeling without clarity leads to overwhelm. Too much detachment without feeling becomes indifference. The middle way is neither drowning in emotion nor avoiding it. It is standing in the open field of awareness where emotion passes through freely. This balance is not achieved through control but through training. Meditation strengthens the capacity to hold energy without tightening. It teaches the nervous system to relax even while feeling deeply. When monks meditate on compassion, they often use metta bhavana, or loving kindness meditation. They begin by generating kindness toward themselves, then gradually extend it outward to a loved one, a neutral person, a difficult person, and finally to all beings. This expansion trains the heart to feel love without boundaries, dissolving the bias that compassion should be reserved for the few. The key is that compassion starts inward. Without self-compassion, empathy collapses. If you cannot hold your own pain kindly, you will be crushed by the pain of others. Self-compassion is not indulgence. It's the recognition that your suffering, too, belongs to the circle of care. Many people exhaust themselves because they give what they refuse to receive. They offer understanding to others while silently judging themselves. The heart then becomes divided, generous outwardly, but barren inwardly. Monks understand that to serve others, one must first sustain the inner flame. Self-care in Buddhism is not selfishness, it's maintenance of clarity. A crucial aspect of boundless compassion is perspective. Compassion without perspective feels personal and heavy. Compassion with perspective feels vast and light. When you view suffering through the lens of karma and impermanence, it stops being tragedy and becomes process. You see that pain is not punishment, but consequence. It's how life balances itself. When you meet someone suffering from this understanding, you no longer pity them, you respect their path. You support without taking ownership of their journey. Empathy fatigue also arises from a hidden expectation, the unconscious belief that your compassion should fix others. When outcomes fail to match that expectation, frustration grows. True compassion does not aim to fix. It simply shines presence into darkness. The Buddha served countless beings, yet never claimed to save anyone. He offered the path, not salvation. In the same way, your role is to be a mirror, not a rescuer. When you release the need to fix, compassion becomes endless because it flows without resistance. This approach redefines boundaries. Many equate compassion with saying yes to everyone, but wise compassion includes saying no when needed. A monk may refuse to participate in harm or enable destructive behavior, not from coldness, but from clarity. Compassion sees that indulging ignorance is not kindness. Setting boundaries preserves energy for service that truly helps. In this way, compassion and discernment walk together. The physiology of compassion also explains why burnout happens. Empathy activates the same brain regions that respond to personal pain, the anterior insular and anterior cingulate cortex. Without mindfulness, repeated exposure leads to fatigue. Compassion, however, activates different circuits areas linked to reward and positive motivation, like the ventral striatum. This means compassion, unlike empathy, energizes rather than drains. The difference lies in perception. Empathy feels pain as mine, compassion sees it as ours. In Buddhist practice, compassion is supported by three pillars: wisdom, equanimity, and joy in giving. Wisdom sees suffering clearly without judgment. Equanimity keeps the heart balanced amid emotional waves. Joy in giving, called mudita, turns service into delight. When these three qualities merge, compassion becomes self-sustaining. It doesn't consume energy, it generates it. This is why monks, even after decades of serving the sick, teaching and meditating, radiate freshness instead of fatigue. Their compassion flows from an infinite source awareness itself. To cultivate this in modern life, start small. When someone shares their pain, listen without rushing to respond. Feel the emotion in the body, the urge to fix, the tightening in the chest, and breathe. Let awareness witness both your reaction and their words. By staying grounded in your own presence, you prevent emotional contagion. Then, speak or act only from calmness, not compulsion. Compassion guided by clarity restores energy instead of depleting it. One of the silent killers of compassion is guilt. Many people feel guilty for not doing enough, for needing rest, for saying no. But guilt is just another form of ego. It says, I should be more than human. Monks release guilt through acceptance of limits. They serve fully when the body allows, and rest when it doesn't. They see no separation between stillness and service, because both are expressions of awareness. You don't need to burn to give light. The sun shines effortlessly because it simply is. Another misunderstanding is that compassion requires emotional pain. Feeling empathy does not mean suffering alongside others. Compassion feels deeply but remains anchored in peace. When you suffer with someone, you add to the collective pain. When you remain peaceful in the face of their suffering, you offer stability. Peace, not pain, is the highest form of empathy. This shift from sympathetic pain to compassionate presence is the essence of Buddhist emotional intelligence. The monks also practice non-attachment to outcome. They plant seeds through service and teaching, but let go of when or how they bloom. This protects the heart from despair. When you attach compassion to results, you create a timeline for disappointment. When you act from love without needing control, the act itself is complete. Compassion fulfilled in its giving asks for nothing in return. Regular meditation replenishes the reservoir of compassion. Stillness is not withdrawal, it's maintenance. After long hours of service, monks return to silence to release emotional residue. The practice is like cleaning a vessel so that water remains clear. For lay people, this means setting boundaries around solitude. Rest is not laziness, it's preparation for deeper presence. Without silence, even noble service turns mechanical. Another principle that sustains compassion is non-personal awareness. When you see yourself and others as expressions of the same consciousness, giving and receiving merge, you no longer feel like a separate person sacrificing for another. You are life helping itself. This perception dissolves the root of exhaustion, the sense of a me who must hold everything. When the self disappears, energy flows effortlessly because it's no longer divided. Compassion also requires trust in the unfolding of life. You may not always see the fruits of your care, but trust that every act of kindness ripples beyond measure. Even a small gesture can plant seeds in unseen soil. The mind wants proof. The heart simply gives. Trust removes the burden of control and allows compassion to be joyful again. The Buddha described 4 immeasurables: loving, kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. These are called immeasurable because they expand without end. Each supports the other. Kindness opens the heart, compassion feels the suffering of others, joy delights in their happiness, and equanimity maintains balance. Practicing all 4 prevents compassion from turning into fatigue. You learn to feel deeply while staying light. In daily life, practice begins with awareness of small interactions. The tone of your voice with a stranger, the patience you offer to someone anxious, the kindness you extend to yourself after a mistake, each is a thread of compassion. When these moments are lived consciously, compassion becomes your natural state rather than a moral effort. You don't try to be kind, you simply stop being distracted from kindness. Boundless compassion doesn't mean endless doing. It means endless being. You serve because the heart cannot do otherwise, not because you feel obligated. When compassion flows naturally, fatigue disappears because there is no self claiming the effort. The body may tire, but the heart remains luminous. You give, rest, and give again, not from depletion but from abundance. Even suffering in the world begins to appear differently. Instead of being overwhelmed by its magnitude, you see it as the collective field of awakening. Every pain calls awareness to arise. Your role is not to erase all suffering, but to contribute light where you stand. Each act of genuine care strengthens the web of consciousness. Compassion then becomes not just an emotion, but a force, the pulse of evolution itself. In advanced practice, compassion transcends feeling and becomes presence itself. You don't think, "I should be compassionate." The distinction between giver and receiver fades. A monk tending to a sick person feels the same awareness in both bodies. That recognition is liberation in action. The heart that has no center cannot burn out, because it no longer holds a border to defend. For modern practitioners, cultivating this depth requires consistent reflection. Ask yourself daily, is my compassion coming from love or fear? From fullness or lack? From awareness or identity? Each honest answer refines your motivation. Compassion purified of self-interest becomes inexhaustible. Over time, compassion transforms into joy. You begin to love, not despite pain, but through it. The world's suffering becomes a call to intimacy, not despair. You see beauty even in imperfection, because compassion reveals unity beneath diversity. It's not about fixing the broken, it's about recognizing that nothing was ever separate. And as this understanding deepens, a new strength appears, a kind of serene resilience. You can face the darkest aspects of humanity without losing faith in goodness. You can sit with grief without drowning. You can love the unlovable without condition. This is the mark of boundless compassion. It holds everything without fear. From here, the path opens into even deeper territory, the recognition that all pain, whether personal or collective, arises from the same source of identification. The next turning explores this mirror more closely, how relationships and conflict reveal our own unhealed attachments, and how, through awareness, even the pain reflected by others becomes a tool for awakening rather than another source of suffering. When compassion matures into boundless clarity, a subtle awareness begins to dawn. You start to see that most of the suffering you once tried to heal or transcend was not born from the pain itself, but from the story built around it. Beneath every emotion, behind every heartbreak or disappointment, runs an inner monologue, a voice that explains, defends, judges, and remembers. It never stops. It speaks softly when you are still and screams when life grows, uncertain. This is the storyteller within the narrator who keeps pain alive long after the moment has passed. The body feels pain once. The mind tells it 1,000 times. That is the essence of cyclical suffering. An event happens, a feeling arises, and then the voice begins to weave meaning. Why it happened, what it says about you, what it means for the future. The mind writes a script faster than you can breathe. Soon the emotion that was meant to move through you becomes trapped in the story about it. You don't suffer from the memory itself, you suffer from the commentary that never ends. This inner storyteller believes it protects you. It tries to make sense of pain to prevent it from repeating. But the mechanism is flawed. The mind cannot stop repeating what it's still trying to understand. So it replays scenes like a film stuck on loop, rehearsing, analyzing, comparing, predicting. It wants closure, but creates continuation. This is why trauma echoes for years, even when the body has healed. The wound has closed, but the narrator keeps retelling the injury. Silence breaks this cycle. Not silence as repression, but the silence that arrives when you stop believing every thought. In that stillness, the storyteller loses its audience. Without attention, the voice fades. And what remains is pure awareness, simple, present, and unburdened by narrative. Monks describe this silence as noble quiet, a state where experience exists without explanation. Pain still arises, but it no longer carries history. It comes as sensation, then dissolves. The storyteller is an evolutionary tool turned against itself. Early humans needed it for survival, to remember danger, to anticipate threats. But in a mind obsessed with control, this function runs wild. The same capacity that helped our ancestors avoid harm now invents harm in imagination. You relive arguments, regret choices, anticipate disasters. The body doesn't know the difference. It reacts to imagined pain as if it were real. Stress hormones surge, muscles tense, and your nervous system lives in a constant state of emergency. The story becomes your prison. To see the storyteller clearly, you must begin to listen consciously. Not to obey, but to observe. Watch how the mind narrates your day, how it labels, criticizes, and predicts. He ignored me. I always mess this up. Things never go right for me. These phrases seem harmless, but they form the foundation of identity. Each repetition etches grooves in the brain, reinforcing emotional patterns. This is how suffering becomes personality. You are not born anxious or unworthy. You become that through storytelling. Neuroscience confirms this. The default mode network, the brain's narrative center, activates when the mind is not engaged in present activity. It stitches together past and future to maintain a sense of self. Meditation quiets this network, which is why moments of deep stillness feel free of identity. The self is a story told so often that it starts to sound like fact. When the voice grows quiet, the self dissolves into presence, the space where pain cannot take root because there is no one to claim it. Awareness exposes the storyteller's tricks. Notice how it turns small discomforts into personal tragedies. A stranger's look becomes proof of rejection. A delay becomes evidence of failure. The storyteller thrives on interpretation because interpretation gives it power. Once you see this, you begin to meet life directly instead of through narrative. A feeling arises, you feel it, and then it passes. There is no replay, no label, no internal courtroom where you are both defendant and judge. Buddhist teachers call this dropping the second arrow. The first arrow is the event, the inevitable pain of life. The second arrow is the story the mind creates afterward. Why me? This always happens. It's unfair. The second arrow wounds deeper than the first because it continues long after the moment ends. Awareness disarms the second arrow by refusing to pick it up. To practice this, begin by pausing between thought and reaction. When a painful memory surfaces, instead of following its narrative, bring attention to the physical sensation that accompanies it. Feel the body's response, tightness, heat, pressure. Stay with that. The body lives in the present, the story lives in time. As attention shifts from thought to sensation, the narrative loses energy. The pain begins to dissolve, not because it's fixed, but because it's finally felt. The storyteller also thrives on identity, the idea of me as the central character. I am the one who was betrayed. I am the one who failed. I am the one who must prove my worth. Each story solidifies the self-image and demands consistency. To maintain that consistency, the mind filters new experiences to match the old script. You may reject kindness because it doesn't fit the story of being unlovable. You may sabotage peace because it contradicts the identity of being a struggler. In this way, the story doesn't describe your life, it shapes it. Breaking this cycle requires seeing identity as narrative construction. You are not the protagonist of a fixed plot, you are the awareness in which countless stories appear and fade. Every thought saying, "I am," is a scene, not the screen. When you realize this, you gain freedom to rewrite or release the story entirely. You no longer have to be the character who suffers. You can step into the silence where no character exists. Silence is the natural state beneath narration. It's not the absence of thought, but the background against which thoughts arise. You can access it through mindful pauses, moments where you stop adding commentary. While eating, just taste. While walking, just walk. When pain arises, just feel. The mind will try to interrupt. This shouldn't hurt. I wish it were different. Notice that voice and let it pass. Each time you return to raw experience, you strengthen your connection to silence. Over time, silence becomes familiar, and the storyteller's voice loses authority. In daily life, this practice means cultivating awareness of your inner dialogue. Keep it simple. When you catch yourself narrating, say quietly, "thinking." This small acknowledgement separates you from the story. You stop being the voice and become the listener. That shift changes everything. The narrator can't trap the one who listens. Listening is freedom. Emotional wounds persist because the mind replays them with added commentary. Each replay reinforces neural pathways associated with the emotion, but awareness introduces plasticity. When you stay present with a thought without reacting, you create new wiring, one that connects emotion with calm instead of panic. Slowly, the habit of storytelling weakens. Silence doesn't erase memory, it erases identification. You remember the past, but it no longer defines you. Silence also reveals the futility of control. The storyteller is obsessed with why and what next. It tries to make sense of chaos. But life's movement cannot be fully explained, only experienced. When you stop demanding answers, peace enters. You begin to trust the intelligence of the present moment. Events unfold, and you respond naturally without the burden of narration. This is how wisdom operates: quiet, intuitive, spontaneous. Even in relationships, the storyteller weaves endless scripts: who's right, who's wrong, who owes what. Conflict escalates because both sides defend their version of the story. When you drop your narrative, communication becomes real. You listen without preparing a reply. You speak without rehearsing. Silence allows empathy to arise naturally, not from effort, but from presence. The heart understands beyond words. In meditation, the storyteller often intensifies before dissolving. As silence deepens, the mind panics, afraid of losing its central role. It throws up thoughts, memories, plans. The key is not to fight them. Let the stories come and go like waves. Each wave that passes without reaction weakens the tide. Eventually, you realize that thoughts never needed to stop. They just needed to be seen as transparent. The noise remains, but you are no longer inside it. The storyteller also feeds on time. It lives in the past and future because those are the only places where story exists. The present moment is too immediate to narrate. That's why presence feels peaceful, it's free of timeline. When you rest in now, the past loses its authority and the future loses its fear. You stop being the one who has a story and become the space in which stories appear. Silence does not mean emptiness. It's full of understanding. From silence, wisdom speaks softly, not in sentences, but in knowing. You may find that what once felt complex now feels simple. Problems dissolve, not because they're solved, but because they lose importance. The storyteller creates drama. Silence reveals proportion. Life remains vivid, but lighter. Another aspect of inner narration is self-criticism, the harsh voice that judges every move. It says, "You're not good enough. You should have known better. You've failed again." This voice keeps pain alive by turning it inward. Awareness transforms it by listening without defense. When you meet that inner critic with compassion instead of argument, it softens. The critic, like all stories, wants to be seen. Once acknowledged, it dissolves into quiet understanding. The habit of storytelling often hides deeper emotions. Sometimes the voice is loud because silence would expose sadness or fear. The narrative becomes a shield against vulnerability. But when you sit quietly and let silence come, those buried feelings surface. This is not regression, it's release. Feeling them fully allows them to pass, and the need for constant narration fades. Silence becomes comfort instead of threat. In community life, shared stories bind people together, but can also trap them collectively. Cultural pain, inherited trauma, and generational grievances persist because the stories remain unexamined. Awareness can heal not only personal suffering but collective suffering by bringing stillness into shared spaces. When groups meditate together or simply stay present without defending their narratives, compassion naturally expands. The silence between words becomes the space where understanding grows. Living from silence doesn't mean rejecting thought. Thought is a tool. Suffering comes from mistaking it for truth. You still plan, remember, and reflect, but without identification. The voice speaks, and you choose what serves. The rest falls away. This selective attention is mastery, the ability to use thought without being used by it. Over time, you may notice that silence speaks a different language, one of intuition. Decisions arise spontaneously, guided by a deeper intelligence. This is not the voice of the storyteller, but the rhythm of awareness itself. It doesn't explain, it moves. When you follow it, life unfolds with less friction. Things align not because you planned them, but because you stopped interfering. There's also humility in silence. When you stop narrating, you stop claiming ownership over life. Events happen through you, not by you. This humility frees you from the need to justify everything. You don't need to be the hero of your story anymore. You become part of a larger story that needs no narrator, the story of life itself. The transition from storytelling to silence is gradual. You may still catch the voice constructing meaning, but now you recognize it as habit, not truth. Each recognition shortens its lifespan. With practice, the voice grows gentler, eventually turning into background noise that doesn't disturb the peace underneath. The less you fight it, the faster it fades. Silence, once feared as emptiness, becomes fullness. It's the ground where all stories arise and return. You realize that pain, when stripped of narrative, is just sensation, transient, impersonal, alive. Without the storyteller to maintain it, even deep wounds become portals to presence. The mind that once clung to stories begins to rest, and resting, it heals. From here, a deeper insight unfolds. Once silence is trusted, awareness begins to perceive not just the absence of story, but the impermanence of everything, how even pain and joy arise and vanish within the same stillness. This understanding leads naturally into the next realization, that liberation is not found in controlling experience, but in recognizing its fleeting nature, the wisdom of impermanence, where pain ends the moment we stop believing it can last forever. When silence deepens, perception shifts in a way that words can barely touch. The stories fade, the noise quiets, and something extraordinary begins to unfold. The direct awareness that everything you feel, every pulse of emotion, every flicker of thought, every ache in the body is in constant motion. Nothing stays. Even pain, which once felt like an immovable mountain, begins to show cracks of change. The heat cools, the tightness loosens, the memory softens. This is the gateway to temporal liberation, the understanding that pain loses power the moment you see its impermanence, not as an idea, but as a lived reality. The Buddha called this truth anicca, impermanence. It's one of the three marks of existence, yet it's also the one most easily understood in theory and most deeply feared in experience. Everyone knows things change, but few truly feel it moment by moment. To experience impermanence is to stand in the flow of life and watch everything, joy, sorrow, body, identity, arise and dissolve with the same inevitability as waves returning to sea. You no longer cling to pleasure or resist pain because both are made of the same transient substance. Pain loses its sting when you stop believing it is permanent. The mind multiplies suffering by projecting duration, by saying, "This will never end," or "I will always feel like this." In that projection, the momentary becomes eternal. Awareness frees you by breaking that illusion. When you attend closely to pain, you begin to see its texture changing, pressure shifting to throbbing, throbbing fading to warmth, warmth thinning to emptiness. Pain is not a solid wall, it is a moving pattern. The more clearly you see this, the less frightening it becomes. Understanding impermanence experientially is not an escape from pain, it's intimacy with it. You observe its nature directly until you realize that it never stays the same long enough to define you. The grief that crushed you one morning feels softer by evening. The anxiety that once held your breath loosens after a few minutes of awareness. The problem was never pain itself, but the belief in its endurance. When you stop fighting to make it end, you discover it was ending all along. The practice begins with observation. Sit with any sensation, pleasant or painful, and watch its birth, duration, and decay. Notice how even the hardest emotions pulse and shift. The mind says, "This hurts." But if you watch closely, you'll see micro moments where the intensity rises and falls. These fluctuations are the proof of impermanence. The body itself teaches the Dharma. The more precise your awareness, the more you see that pain is not one continuous thing but a stream of changing signals interpreted by the mind. Neuroscience supports this insight. Brain imaging shows that pain perception involves moment-to-moment processing, not a single unbroken signal. The prefrontal cortex interprets, the amygdala reacts, the sensory cortex registers, all in shifting rhythms. The mind's illusion of continuity stitches these impulses into a solid experience called my pain. But awareness breaks that stitching. You begin to see pain as pulses of sensation rather than a permanent state. This is why mindfulness reduces suffering, even when pain remains. It reveals its changing nature. Impermanence also applies to emotion. Anger, sadness, fear, all feel endless while you're inside them, but none can sustain themselves without fuel. They depend on thought to stay alive. When awareness stops feeding them stories, they dissolve. The body cannot hold tension forever. Even despair has pauses, the spaces between sobs, the brief breaths of stillness. When you rest attention on these spaces, you find the doorway to peace. The pause itself is proof that the storm cannot last. To see impermanence clearly, you must also see how clinging gives birth to time. The mind measures change and creates continuity. Without clinging, time loses weight. Minutes or hours become fluid, like breath. You begin to experience life not as a sequence, but as unfolding presence. In this state, pain can appear and disappear without leaving residue. The mind doesn't store it as trauma, because it no longer insists, this should not have happened. It simply recognizes, this happened and it passed. The greatest resistance to impermanence is fear of loss. The same mind that wants pain to end also wants pleasure to stay. It doesn't realize they are the same motion viewed from different sides. When you hold on to joy, you plant the seed of future grief. When you resist grief, you plant the seed of future craving. Understanding impermanence dissolves both. You start to meet joy without attachment and pain without aversion. Life becomes fluid, not safer, but freer. In meditation, this understanding matures through direct experience. As you sit, sensations arise, tingling, heat, pressure. If you remain still, each one transforms on its own. Thoughts arise, peak, and vanish. Even the sense of I am meditating flickers in and out. This direct seeing is liberation from within time. You're not forcing change, you're watching change happen. The insight doesn't need belief, it needs attention. The recognition of impermanence also changes how you relate to others. You stop freezing people in your mind. You no longer say, she is always like this, or he will never change, because you see that nothing stays fixed. Every person, including you, is a field of constant transformation. This understanding breeds forgiveness. You forgive because you know that the person who hurt you no longer exists in the same form. The past itself is gone, only memory remains. Memory is another illusion of permanence. The mind replays events as if they're happening again, but what it replays is not reality, it's reconstruction. Neuroscientists call this reconsolidation. Each time you recall an event, the brain rebuilds it with slight alterations. Memory is fluid, not fixed. Knowing this loosens the grip of resentment and regret. You begin to see that the past can't imprison you because it never stops changing in the mind. Impermanence also reshapes the understanding of identity. The self feels stable only because memory and narrative create continuity. But when you watch your own thoughts and sensations change moment to moment, you realize there is no fixed I enduring through them. You are a process, not a person. This realization dissolves much of psychological suffering because it undercuts ownership. Pain arises, but there's no one solid to suffer it. The wave rises and falls. The ocean remains untouched. Temporal liberation is freedom from both past and future. The past no longer defines, and the future no longer frightens. The only reality is the present, endlessly renewing itself. To live here is to live outside the grip of pain's timeline. When discomfort arises, you stay with its momentary nature. When pleasure comes, you savor it without clutching. Life stops being a series of crises to manage and becomes a flow to witness. Understanding impermanence experientially also changes your nervous system. The body relaxes because it no longer perceives pain as eternal threat. When you believe pain will last, the body braces, creating tension that amplifies suffering. When you see pain as movement, the body opens. Breath flows more freely, muscles soften, awareness becomes medicine. You're no longer waiting for pain to end, you're watching it change, and in that watching, tension dissolves. This insight transforms even grief. Losing someone or something dear feels unbearable because the mind clings to the image of permanence that things were meant to stay. But when you deeply see that everything, including love, is a wave, grief changes texture. It still aches, but it carries beauty, the beauty of impermanence itself. You realize that what makes moments precious is precisely that they end. Love's fragility is its brilliance. To grieve is to witness life's truth in motion. Impermanence also reveals the futility of control. You cannot freeze a moment, a feeling, or a person. Control is resistance to change, disguised as safety. Awareness replaces control with participation. You don't fight the current, you learn to move with it. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you wise. You act where action matters and release where it doesn't. This is the dance of balance effort without attachment. In daily life, practicing impermanence means paying attention to small transitions, the pause between breaths, the shift of light through a window, the way emotions morph during conversation. These details remind the mind of its true nature, transient, responsive, alive. The more you notice, the less you grasp. Presence becomes a habit stronger than clinging. The insight into anicca also dismantles anxiety. Anxiety is the mind's refusal to accept change. It anticipates the future and tries to control outcomes. But the future is made of the same impermanent fabric as everything else, always changing, never arriving as imagined. When you rest in this understanding, fear transforms into curiosity. The unknown stops being threat and becomes possibility. You meet life with openness rather than defense. Impermanence does not mean nothing matters. It means everything matters precisely because it's fleeting. The flower's beauty depends on its short bloom. The conversation's warmth glows because it won't repeat exactly. Realizing this heightens appreciation. You become attentive to the present, not because it will last, but because it won't. Gratitude replaces attachment. Each moment becomes a gift unwrapped and gone before grasping can begin. Living with awareness of impermanence creates gentleness. You stop demanding perfection from yourself and others. Mistakes are seen as transient patterns, not fixed flaws. Growth becomes natural because nothing is frozen in identity. This understanding dissolves shame. You no longer say, "I am this kind of person." You see that personality is weather, sometimes sunny, sometimes stormy. The sky remains clear behind it. The experiential realization of impermanence also transforms spiritual practice. Many seekers chase permanent states, eternal bliss, lasting enlightenment. But awakening itself is impermanent as an experience. What remains constant is awareness of change. The wise stop chasing stability and rest in fluidity. They see that permanence was never the goal. Freedom from clinging was. The mind that accepts impermanence finds stillness within movement. Even morality gains depth through this insight. When you know actions have consequences that ripple through time, you act with mindfulness. Yet you also forgive, because no one stays the same person who erred. This balance of responsibility and forgiveness is wisdom in motion. You can hold accountability without hatred, because both you and the other are changing continuously. The deeper you live in impermanence, the more spontaneous life becomes. Decisions arise naturally, unclouded by the need for control. Joy becomes lighter because it's free from fear of ending. Even pain, when seen as process, carries a quiet beauty. It's the universe transforming through you. You begin to experience everything as movement within a greater flow. Impermanence also points toward compassion. Knowing that everyone is bound to change, you stop judging others based on moments. A person's anger, greed, or ignorance is seen as a temporary state. This perspective invites patience. Compassion grows not from superiority, but from shared understanding. We are all waves of the same ocean, rising and falling together. There is also serenity in recognizing that death itself is impermanence completing its cycle. Life is not cut short, it fulfills its rhythm. What we call ending is transition. The atoms of the body return to earth. Consciousness continues its mysterious unfolding. When you truly understand impermanence, death loses its terror. It becomes the natural counterpart of birth, two breaths in the same continuum. Meditation on impermanence can be as simple as watching a candle flame. Each flicker is different, each second a birth and death. You watch not to mourn the change, but to marvel at its precision. The flame's beauty depends on motion, so does yours. You are not a fixed entity watching change, you are change watching itself. When this truth is felt directly, fear evaporates. You rest in what never clings. In the deepest realization, even the concept of impermanence dissolves. There is no permanent or impermanent, only unfolding. The mind that divides time into past and future disappears into timeless awareness. This is temporal liberation in its purest form. Freedom not from pain, but from the illusion of continuity that gives pain power. From this place of seeing, every experience, even suffering, becomes luminous. You no longer ask, "When will this end?" because the question itself has ended. What remains is direct participation in the eternal now, where change is not threat but grace. The river flows, the wind moves, and you move with it not as a traveler passing through time, but as time itself unfolding. As understanding deepens, awareness begins to perceive pain as teacher rather than enemy. Each wave of discomfort becomes a reminder of movement, a call to return to presence. The practice of observing impermanence continues naturally into the next exploration. Learning how physical pain itself, when met without resistance or narrative, becomes a silent teacher, revealing the path to peace, not through escape, but through complete surrender to what is. When the truth of impermanence sinks deep into your bones, a quiet shift occurs. You no longer see pain as an intruder to be banished, but as a messenger arriving with its own wisdom. In that recognition, the struggle softens. You begin to sense that pain, when stripped of story and resistance, has something profound to teach, not through words, but through presence. This is where the silent teacher appears. Physical pain, unadorned by mental commentary, revealing lessons the intellect could never grasp. Most people meet pain with defense. The body tenses, the breath shortens, the mind protests. This shouldn't be happening. But these reactions only deepen suffering. When pain is treated as an enemy, it grows louder, as if asking to be heard. Yet when awareness meets it directly, without aggression or pity, the relationship changes. The pain remains, but it stops being personal. It becomes sensation raw, immediate, alive. The body becomes both the field and the instructor. Pain teaches patience first. It moves at its own pace, immune to impatience. The more you fight, the longer it lingers. In meditation, when discomfort arises, an ache in the knee, a sting in the back, the practice is not to flee or force relief. It is to observe, to stay curious. What happens when you breathe into the pain instead of away from it? You begin to notice layers, the physical signal, the emotional reaction, the mental resistance. Beneath them, a quiet stillness waits. This stillness doesn't remove pain, but it transforms the way you experience it. The mind's commentary is what amplifies pain into suffering. The physical signal may last seconds. The mental story stretches it into days. This means something is wrong with me. It will get worse. I can't live like this. Each thought adds tension to the nervous system. Awareness breaks this loop by returning attention to direct sensation. Pain as felt experience is just vibration, pressure, temperature, constantly shifting. Pain as thought is endless. When you stay with sensation, you discover that even discomfort has rhythm. It pulses, expands, and fades. The lesson: nothing in the body is static. Chronic pain, in particular, becomes a profound teacher of presence. For those who live with it daily, escape seems impossible. Yet many long-term practitioners describe a transformation when they stop viewing pain as obstacle and begin treating it as meditation partner. Instead of asking, "How can I get rid of this?" they ask, "What can I learn from this?" Pain becomes a guide into the body's deepest layers, revealing areas of contraction, old emotion, and forgotten fear. The more awareness enters these places, the more they soften. Sometimes the pain lessens, sometimes it doesn't. But the suffering always decreases because resistance fades. This approach aligns with neuroscience. Studies show that mindfulness practice alters how the brain processes pain. The sensory areas still register it, but the emotional centers quiet down. This means pain is felt, but not dramatized. Awareness separates the raw signal from the emotional reaction, allowing calm coexistence. You begin to feel pain without being overwhelmed by it, a skill that transforms not just the experience of illness, but of life itself. Pain also teaches humility. It strips away pretense, reminding you that the body, no matter how disciplined, is fragile. It humbles the intellect that believes it can control everything. In humility, compassion grows. When you've met your own pain without flinching, you understand the pain of others in a deeper way. You no longer need to analyze suffering to care about it, you've sat with it directly. The silent teacher doesn't speak, yet it opens the heart more effectively than 1,000 philosophies. Another lesson pain offers is the dissolution of identity. Chronic discomfort can make the sense of me seem unbearable, my pain, my problem, my limitation. But when awareness looks closer, ownership begins to fade. Pain is seen as a process nerves, firing, signals passing, sensations arising and vanishing. The body hurts. Awareness observes. There's no solid self enduring inside it, only shifting patterns. This insight frees you from the mental label, "I am in pain." Instead, it becomes, "Pain is happening." The difference is vast. The first traps you. The second liberates you. In daily life, meeting pain without commentary can begin with small moments. A headache, a stomach cramp, a sore muscle. Instead of rushing for distraction or judgment, pause. Feel the exact texture of sensation. Where does it start? Does it have edges? Does it move? Usually, you'll find that what seemed unbearable is more complex, even fascinating. Pain loses its solidity when observed directly. It becomes an event within awareness, not a prison around it. The breath is the bridge here. Breathing consciously while in pain regulates the nervous system and keeps awareness anchored. Each inhale acknowledges sensation. Each exhale releases tension. You're not escaping, you're befriending. Pain may still speak, but the voice grows calmer. This is not suppression, it's intimacy. The body begins to trust awareness, and in that trust, healing, physical or emotional, becomes possible. The silent teacher also exposes how often we confuse sensation with meaning. The mind interprets pain as punishment, karma, or failure. But pain has no moral weight. It's neutral part of the body's communication system. When you stop attaching stories, pain reveals pure intelligence. It tells you where energy is stuck, where rest is needed, where attention should return. Listening without judgment turns pain from enemy into guide. In meditation retreats, practitioners often experience waves of discomfort after hours of sitting. Teachers advise not to move immediately, but to observe. Some find that the pain changes into heat, tingling, or even pleasure when observed without fear. What changes is not the body alone, but perception. The mind's resistance is what turns discomfort into suffering. When resistance dissolves, sensation becomes energy, neither good nor bad, simply alive. Pain also teaches balance between surrender and care. To accept pain does not mean neglecting the body, it means responding wisely rather than reacting impulsively. You learn to discern when rest, medicine, or movement is needed, and when it's simply the mind craving control. Awareness replaces panic with precision. The body's messages become clear when the mind stops shouting over them. Chronic pain challenges identity at the deepest level. It strips away the illusion that happiness depends on perfect conditions. When peace is found even amid discomfort, freedom becomes unshakable. Monks who endure illness or hardship speak of gratitude for their bodies because pain keeps them awake. It reminds them of impermanence, of the preciousness of each breath. Pain, when met consciously, becomes a constant meditation bell, calling you back to presence. There's also a profound link between physical and emotional pain. The body stores unprocessed emotions, grief in the chest, fear in the gut, anger in the jaw. When these areas ache, it's often a sign of old energy asking for release. Meeting pain with awareness allows these emotions to surface and dissolve. The body heals not just physically, but psychically. Each sensation becomes a teacher showing where love and attention were once withheld. Pain invites you into slowness. In a culture addicted to movement and distraction, pain demands stillness. You learn patience not because you want to, but because you must. This forced slowing becomes sacred. In the quiet, subtler realities emerge the heartbeat, the breath, the constant dance of life within the body. You discover that even in discomfort, there is beauty in awareness itself. Silence, when practiced with pain, becomes more than absence of words. It becomes direct communication with life. Without commentary, you feel the body's intelligence guiding you. Pain sharpens, perceptions, sounds become clearer, sensations more vivid. The boundary between observer and observed dissolves. What remains is experience unfolding without resistance. This is meditation in its rawest form. Pain also teaches impermanence in real time. As awareness stabilizes, you notice pain breaking apart into micro moments arising, peaking, subsiding. You begin to trust that even the worst sensations are transient. This trust ends fear, and without fear, suffering cannot survive. Each moment of pain becomes proof of movement, a reminder that change never stops. The lesson of the silent teacher is not to glorify suffering, but to see it clearly. Pain is part of existence. Fighting it doesn't make it disappear. Understanding it transforms its meaning. The mind seeks pleasure as validation, but awareness finds wisdom in every experience. When you can sit with pain calmly, you gain a freedom that pleasure could never give. The body, too, becomes wiser through this practice. Tension begins to dissolve because attention itself is healing. The nervous system learns that awareness means safety. Each time you meet pain without resistance, you reprogram the body to trust presence. Over time, this trust extends beyond the physical. You become less reactive to emotional discomfort, less fearful of uncertainty, more grounded in reality as it is. Pain, in its silence, also reveals interconnection. Every living being feels it: animal, human, even the smallest insect. To know your own pain intimately is to understand the universal pulse of life. Compassion grows naturally because you recognize yourself in every cry, every ache. The world's suffering stops being abstract. It becomes shared humanity. Pain, once isolating, now connect. There's an old Zen saying, "The obstacle is the path." Pain, when embraced as teacher, becomes that path. It exposes what's unhealed, unmoved, unacknowledged. It dismantles arrogance and softens pride. It makes you honest because pain doesn't tolerate pretense. You learn humility not as weakness, but as alignment with truth. The body bows before reality, and the heart follows. In time, the practice of sitting with pain without commentary leads to serenity. You stop needing the pain to end in order to feel peace. Peace becomes the space that holds pain. The sensation may remain, but the suffering disappears. This paradox is the hallmark of awakening through the body, realizing that peace and pain can coexist without contradiction. From this clarity, gratitude arises. Not gratitude for the pain itself, but for the depth of awareness it awakened. Every pulse of discomfort became a doorway to insight. Every moment of endurance revealed a new layer of compassion. The silent teacher gave lessons no book could offer: patience, humility, presence, and love beyond preference. The more you listen, the more subtle its teaching becomes. You begin to see that even physical sensation is not solid. It's a dance of energy perceived by consciousness. You are not inside pain. Pain is appearing within you. When this truth settles, you realize that even pain cannot touch awareness. The silent teacher then completes its work, showing you that you were never the one suffering, only the one observing. And from here, another dimension of understanding unfolds naturally. Once pain is no longer the enemy and awareness no longer flees from discomfort, a new insight appears. That suffering itself is not punishment, but echo, a reverberation of energy, seeking balance, not blame. The next teaching explores this in depth. How to see pain as karma's echo rather than cosmic judgment, transforming guilt into understanding and resistance into release. When the body has been met with awareness and pain has been seen as teacher rather than enemy, another veil begins to lift. You start to wonder why certain kinds of suffering seem to repeat patterns that return in different forms, lessons that reappear until understood. Some call it coincidence, others fate. But in the language of Buddhist wisdom, this recurrence is known as karma, not punishment, but resonance. Karma is the echo of energy, the continuation of cause through time. When pain revisits, it's not life-seeking revenge, it's life-seeking balance. Karma, stripped of superstition, is simply the law of cause and effect in motion. Every thought, word, and action releases energy into the field of existence. That energy does not vanish, it circulates, returning in ways that reflect its origin. When kindness is offered, harmony echoes. When ignorance drives harm, discord echoes. These returns are not moral verdicts but mirrors. They show us what remains unresolved in the mind. Suffering, seen through this lens, becomes information feedback from life itself. The problem arises when karma is misunderstood as punishment. Many believe their pain means they did something wrong, in this life or another. But guilt distorts understanding. The Buddha never described karma as divine retribution. He described it as natural law, like gravity. It doesn't judge, it responds. The echo is not sent to hurt you, it's sent to wake you. When you drop the idea of punishment, you begin to meet your suffering with curiosity instead of shame. You start asking, what energy is returning, what pattern seeks release? Karma operates not only across lifetimes, as tradition teaches, but within the micro-movements of daily life. Every reaction carries momentum. When anger is met with anger, its energy reinforces itself, returning as more conflict. When awareness interrupts reaction, the energy dissolves instead of echoing. This is why mindfulness is the greatest purifier of karma. Awareness ends the cycle not by erasing the past, but by stopping unconscious repetition. Pain that repeats is not proof of failure. It's proof of persistence. Life keeps presenting the same themes until the lesson is complete. The moment you meet the echo with understanding, it changes frequency. The same situation may arise again, but it no longer controls you. Karma is not a chain. It's a curriculum. Each event is a class in consciousness, designed by the intelligence of cause and effect. Seeing suffering as karma's echo brings responsibility without blame. You recognize that your experiences are shaped by patterns of mind, yet you also understand they are opportunities for evolution. Blame closes the heart, responsibility opens it. The mature soul stops asking, "Why me?" and starts asking, "What is life showing me now?" That shift transforms victimhood into authorship. Karma then becomes a dialogue between you and existence. The subtlety of this teaching is that karma is not personal in the way ego believes. The energy of thought and action reverberates through collective fields as well. An act of kindness ripples far beyond individual boundaries, just as collective ignorance creates shared suffering. Social injustice, environmental harm, and conflict are not punishments inflicted by gods but consequences of collective causes. Understanding this expands compassion. You realize that your healing contributes to the healing of the whole, because each change in consciousness alters the field for everyone. In this view, suffering carries purpose without moral weight. A painful event may feel undeserved, but from the perspective of karmic resonance, it is part of a larger harmony seeking restoration. The energy you experience today might not have originated in this lifetime. It might be ancestral, cultural, or universal. The point is not to trace its origin, but to end its repetition through awareness. The question is never, "What did I do wrong?" but "How can I meet this now with wisdom?" Meeting karma consciously begins with observation. When discomfort arises, watch the impulse to blame. The mind immediately seeks a story. "This happened because they hurt me," or "I must have done something terrible in the past." These stories keep karma spinning because they sustain judgment. Awareness, however, simply observes the return of energy without labeling it good or bad. The echo is acknowledged, felt, and released. What is felt fully is freed. The process of releasing karmic echoes can be subtle. Sometimes it happens through recognition. The instant you see a pattern clearly, it dissolves. Other times, it unfolds through patience, as life keeps giving you chances to respond differently. Either way, awareness is the key. Each conscious choice not to repeat old reactions weakens the old frequency and establishes a new one. In this way, karma is not destiny but practice. Painful relationships are one of the clearest mirrors of karmic echo. You may attract people who reflect your unresolved emotions. Someone's criticism touches your old insecurity. Their indifference revives forgotten rejection. These encounters are not punishments but invitations to integrate what's incomplete. When you respond with awareness instead of defense, the karmic bond loosens. The relationship may change, or it may end, but either way the energy evolves. The lesson is learned when reaction is replaced by understanding. The same principle applies to chronic physical or emotional struggles. When the same illness, financial difficulty, or heartbreak keeps appearing, it signals that a deeper belief is seeking illumination. Life repeats the experience not out of cruelty but out of love, because you are ready to see what you couldn't before. Karma persists only until awareness ripens enough to outgrow it. Once seen clearly, even pain becomes compassion's echo rather than punishment's shadow. Karma also teaches balance through contrast. Pleasure and pain are not opposites but partners in education. Pleasure teaches expansion. Pain teaches depth. One reveals joy, the other endurance. Both are temporary, and both mirror the energy we project into life. When you grasp this, gratitude arises naturally. Even hardship feels meaningful because you know it's part of a larger unfolding of consciousness. Gratitude doesn't erase difficulty, it infuses it with light. Understanding karma experientially requires direct observation of cause and effect in your own life. Notice how anger breeds tension, how generosity breeds ease, how honesty brings peace while deceit creates restlessness. These are not moral teachings but energetic realities. The more you observe, the more faith you develop in the law itself. Faith here is not belief but recognition, a trust that life is coherent, that nothing happens without reason, and that every experience contributes to awakening. To work with karmic echoes skillfully, meditation is essential. When the mind quiets, patterns surface. Old memories, sensations, or emotions may arise, sometimes without clear context. Rather than analyzing, allow them to complete their cycle. You are witnessing the unwinding of stored energy. This is karmic purification in real time. The mind need not understand the story. Awareness dissolves it by presence alone. The echo fades when no one claims it. Compassion for yourself is vital during this process. As old energies surface, guilt or shame may appear. The ego says, "I created this, I deserve this." But awareness replies, "This is simply energy returning to balance." Compassion means meeting yourself with the same gentleness you would offer a friend. You cannot purify karma through punishment. You can only purify it through understanding. Karma also unfolds collectively, and awareness of this broadens your sense of responsibility. Every thought of kindness contributes to collective peace. Every act of hostility contributes to collective pain. This awareness doesn't create pressure but empowerment. You realize that each choice matters. A single compassionate gesture can ripple through unseen networks, easing suffering far beyond your knowledge. Karma is not a ledger of guilt, it's a living ecosystem of consciousness. Another important understanding is that karma is dynamic, not fixed. The past influences the present, but the present can reshape the future. Every moment of awareness interrupts old cycles. Forgiveness, for instance, can dissolve generations of resentment. The echo stops, not by erasing the past, but by refusing to send another wave of the same vibration. When you respond with love, instead of vengeance, you rewrite your trajectory. The language of karma also invites humility. You stop assuming you know why things happen. The mind loves to assign reasons, "This happened because I deserved it," or "because I'm unlucky." True wisdom recognizes mystery. You may never understand the full web of causes that led to a single event. Acceptance replaces speculation. When you no longer demand explanations, Peace grows naturally. From this humility comes equanimity. You begin to treat joy and sorrow as equal parts of the same continuum. When happiness comes, you appreciate it without grasping. When suffering comes, you receive it without bitterness. Both are echoes, reflections of energies long set in motion. The wise bow to both because both lead to balance. In this way, karmic awareness dissolves resentment. When you see that those who harm you are also caught in their own karmic loops, your heart softens. You understand that ignorance, not malice, drives their actions. This doesn't excuse harm, but it frees you from hatred. Forgiveness becomes possible because you see that everyone, including you, is working through echoes of past misunderstanding. Compassion replaces judgment. Empathy replaces blame. When you apply this understanding to your own life, even regrets transform. The things you wish you hadn't done become teachers. You see that guilt is unnecessary because the lesson itself redeems the act. The purpose of karma is learning, not condemnation. Once insight arises, the old pattern completes its circle. There's no need to punish yourself further. Awareness closes the account. This understanding also changes how you perceive time. You realize that karma doesn't only unfold linearly. It can complete in a single breath when insight is total. A flash of genuine forgiveness can end years of suffering. A moment of deep surrender can heal lifetimes of resistance. Karma moves at the speed of awareness. The more present you become, the faster old energy transforms. Awareness of karma also deepens patience. You stop expecting immediate outcomes. Just as seeds take time to grow, causes ripen in their own season. You learn to act rightly without obsession over results. Right intention is your responsibility. Outcome belongs to life. This patience turns effort into offering. The heart stays steady because it trusts the law of cause and effect to unfold naturally. When awareness matures, you begin to experience karma not as burden but as rhythm. You sense that all events, even painful ones, move toward harmony. Like sound waves finding resonance, every experience tunes consciousness closer to truth. Pain is the dissonant note that invites alignment. When met with presence, it resolves into clarity. The echo fades into silence. This silence is not emptiness, but completion. It's the stillness that follows understanding. You no longer feel compelled to analyze or defend the past. The energy that once drove repetition now rests. What remains is compassion, not sentimental but profound, born of direct seeing. You know now that nothing was ever wasted. Every difficulty was a lesson in disguise. Every wound a doorway to wisdom. As this insight settles, a new dimension of peace emerges. You stop fearing karma because you understand it as teacher, not judge. You meet life with openness because you trust its intelligence. When challenges arise, you respond with clarity instead of resistance. The heart becomes spacious, ready to transform whatever echoes come next into awareness itself. From this point of realization, awareness begins to sense another layer beneath personal karma, the deeper human habit of emotional investment in pain. You start to see how, even after karmic understanding, the mind clings to suffering because it finds identity and meaning in it. The next unfolding explores this subtle economy of suffering, why the mind keeps investing energy in its own pain, and how releasing that investment becomes the next act of freedom. And so, after walking through every layer of pain, the body, the mind, the story, the ego, and the echo, a single truth remains: pain will visit, but suffering is a choice. Each lesson points back to the same realization. Awareness transforms everything it touches. When the mind stops resisting, when the heart stops judging, when the body is met with kindness, pain becomes a teacher instead of a tormentor. Buddhism doesn't promise a life free from pain. It offers freedom within it. Freedom born from presence, from compassion, from the quiet courage to say, "This too belongs." Every moment of discomfort becomes an invitation to wake up, to soften, to see clearly. And in that clarity, the boundary between pain and peace disappears. What's left is acceptance, not resignation, but harmony with reality as it is. If this journey spoke to you, I'd love to hear what part resonated most. Was there a lesson that shifted how you see pain or suffering? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your reflection might be the light someone else needs today. And if you found value in these teachings, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications. Together, let's keep exploring the art of awareness, the peace hidden inside chaos, and the timeless wisdom that reminds us, pain is inevitable, but suffering, that's where our freedom begins.